listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it's time now for another edition of the most disruptive show, covering news, politics, and events from across these disunited states and the increasingly divided surface of our globe. In the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together that means you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right. Good morning, everybody. It is October 18th. It's just past 7 a.m. Eastern here in Washington, D.C. Let's get into headlines. First up in COVID news. Yesterday in the United States, there were 22,152 new COVID cases reported, along with 1,528 new deaths. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 83,576 cases per day. That's a decrease of 22% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 57% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated. 66% of residents have received at least one dose of a COVID vaccine. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 44,915,000 people across the United States. It has killed 724,499 people. In August, people aged 30 to 49 were 37 times more likely to die from COVID if they hadn't been vaccinated than if they had. That is a lot of times more likely. 37 times more likely. In national news, ex-U.S. Air Force Captain Bob Salais claims that he saw a UFO while at a military base in Montana in 1967. He stated that it hovered over a launch control capsule, shot a beam of light down, and disabled 10 Minutemen intercontinental ballistic missiles. Salais clearly sees this as a message from extraterrestrials about Earth's nuclear habits and capabilities. And this is, I believe, posted by you in relation to this upcoming convention conference thing going on, right?
Yeah, so there's a conference going on tomorrow at the National Press Club, and it's only open for congressional members or politicians and press. Me.
And you.
Yes.
And you.
And so that's going to be a really interesting event. With all of the releases and everything else, he's basically coming out saying, look, this goes beyond just the videos and stuff like that. There has been this kind of concerted effort, not just in the United States, but across the world, actually, to kind of get across the nuclear thing. And it seems to be something that comes up over and over again. Either things are flying around nuclear facilities, but in his case, his story, I've heard this story, I think maybe about 10 years ago. And his story was pretty compelling, considering where he was, what he was doing at the time, meaning his station. And there are going to be, I think, 4 other military people who are going to be there basically attesting to the same thing. So it should be very interesting and see whether the press picks it up. Sputnik picked it up, so applause for them. They had the article about it. But I'm curious on who else is going to get it. I asked him for an interview. He made the point of saying he wants more bang for his buck. But he's going to be out, so we may be able to get an interview with him. But definitely he's going to try to get some of the local press, CNN, ABC, et cetera, to pick up the story. Considering everything else that has been released, this kind of just fits right within that question mark that's been placed on our table.
Yeah, very interesting. You're probably going to be one of the most excited people in that room.
Yeah. Incendiary. Pretty much burning embers.
But I hope you have a great time. You know, a concentration of people who know a lot about this stuff and are interested in this stuff.
It should be good.
And political opportunity for this stuff.
I am genuinely hoping he gets a really big crowd and a lot of press to pick that up. That's a massive story. I mean, if he's right, and you can basically trace down, okay, yes, he was here. Yes, he was doing this. Yes, those missiles went down. That is extraordinary as a story.
Yes.
And it gets to this whole thing of what is the Department of Defense doing and doesn't have things to answer in regard to, like, how did that happen?
Yeah.
He makes the point that they told him to shut up about it. That basically they had to sign a waiver saying, okay, we're never going to talk about this and never bring this up.
Which means probably they wouldn't find, history of it, right? Historical reference to the event itself.
I mean, it's a big deal if your missiles shut down. That shouldn't happen. And there should be some thing of either the people who had to repair it, the time frame that it had to be repaired, at the time it was down, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Like there should be some kind of lagging information where an investigation can be had to make sure that each of those things are true. But like I said, with all of the releases and the videos and stuff like that that's been coming out, this kind of fits right within it. But it's one of those things that if him and these other guys are saying it, that should be validated. Like that should definitely be something where people are like, okay, is that true? Because if that's true, that is mind-blowing.
Yeah, yeah. All right, more headlines here. Continuing on with national headlines. Last year, after the George Floyd protests began, Professor Gordon Klein of UCLA received an email from a white student asking the professor to grade her black classmates more leniently. She reasoned this by saying, quote, the unjust killings of black Americans by law enforcement and other whites, along with the effect the COVID-19 pandemic was having on the black community, may be causing them stress that might affect their classwork. When he, quote, end quote, when he refused this, the school placed the teacher on a suspension. Klein is now suing UCLA for defamation, labor law violations, breach of contract, violation of privacy, and interference with his consulting business. So again, professor at a university has a young black student who messages him asking if she can get her classmates off of work. What's your take on this, Jamarl? Oh, and then white student. Oh, thank you, white student.
A white student calls in and says, hey, can you grade the black students a little bit more lenient than the white students? Because hashtag reasons. Yeah, it's nonsense. I mean, all of these guys are in school together. And I don't necessarily think blacks have any kind of mental deficiency where they're incapable of doing the work that they were, to their white counterparts. I mean, for that matter, it's like, aren't whites affected by COVID too? I mean, there are more whites in this country than blacks. By what, 70% to like 15 or 13%. Aren't they also adversely affected by these things? And even going with the police violence and everything else, I don't necessarily know what George Floyd has to do specifically with the person in college doing something, unless they are stopped by the cops themselves or unless they've grown up in that situation.
I've actually, Gordon Klein over on Substack posted an essay about this that I read, I think, last week, briefly when it came out. I think it would have been over the weekend. Anyway. Part of what's not included in this headline, just an interesting fact about this story, is that in his response back, and this is, I think, part of why the university decided to get rid of him. Not that it's at all justified.
He said something that was a little.
He said something that was it's just a little bit like cringy or whatever, which is, couldn't I say the same thing about white students who a lot of people suspect of being racist, who suspect of being racially motivated? Couldn't I give them time off? Which is kind of cringy. It's like, wait, what? Because the whole point is during the George Floyd protests, black people are dealing with a lot of stuff. Give them some lenience on time work. He makes the point, well, white people are under suspicion of racism, which is just a cringy point to make, but he's trying to make fun of her, and I get what he's doing, or not trying to make fun of her. But he's
a weird response.
He's trying to frame it in a way that's like, this is a completely arbitrary request that you're making on me, that kind of thing. Yeah. But it's a kind of cringy response. But it's not a fire-worthy offense as far as I can tell.
And cringy is, it's a little cringy. I mean, but it's not. Yeah, that's not a fire-worthy offense. I mean, I don't even see what's wrong with the comment from the standpoint of whether management needs to get involved to kind of do something about the job stuff. No, he responded in somewhat a weird way. But, I mean, even this notion of, it's like, hey, aren't more whites under suspicion because of the thing that happened with George Floyd? And because those whites are under suspicion that aren't racist, even though they're suspected of being racist, shouldn't they get some kind of thing for the emotional, that's a little weird.
Yes, it is.
He should have just addressed it directly and was like,
addressed it directly and moved on. And that's the thing. And if he had done that, I doubt that UCLA would have done anything.
Yeah, no issues there.
Granted, as I said before, I still don't think that what they did was justified based on looking at what's come out about this. Anyway, moving on into other headlines. In international news, on Saturday, a group of 17 U.S. missionaries, including 5 children, were kidnapped by a gang in Haiti. They were on their way home from building an orphanage when they were jumped and taken. The mission's field director was not with the group at the time of the abduction and is working with the U.S. Embassy to get the rest of the group released. He stated that, quote, this is a special prayer alert. Pray that the gang members would come to repentance, end quote. In a UN court, Azerbaijan's deputy foreign minister has accused Armenia of ethnic cleansing and laying landmines since the end of the ceasefire late last year. Elnur Mammadov said the landmines have killed 106 Azerbaijanis, including 65 civilians, since the conflict was ended by a Russian-brokered deal last year. The Financial Times reported that China's launch in August of a hypersonic nuclear-capable rocket that flew around the world, that's how it's reported, surprised many in Western intelligence. China denied it tested a nuclear-capable hypersonic missile, with its foreign ministry spokesman saying a routine test had been carried out to test different types of reusable spacecraft technology. He said the Financial Times reporting on this was flawed. In business news, new data leaks project that Netflix's Squid Game will generate $891 million in revenue, considering the show has had a production cost of $21.4 million. Netflix hit big on this series. The only question now, Jamarl, do you think you should survive the Squid Game, maybe an American version?
I haven't seen it.
With familiar games?
My wife has watched it, and it keeps coming up, but I haven't necessarily sat down to watch it. But yeah,
I'm like a combination of out of touch and in touch. I didn't hear about this at all until last week, until suddenly like everybody was talking about it for some reason, because I think, the Netflix big debut.
Yeah, it's basically they're putting these people through these kind of challenges that are deadly challenges. And, like I said, my wife watched it. I only saw it kind of...
It's like a less cool ripoff of this other South Korean TV show series that I actually did watch that had the first season out. I'm just trying to remember the name of that series. Where it's the same thing where like they take the difference in that series, something has to do with Alice in Wonderland in some way, but they take people into this alternate dimension and have them play these like games against each other.
Alice in Wonderland.
Is it?
Yeah. But it's not called Alice. It's Alice in something land.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. She watched that one too.
Yeah.
which
is earlier is my point.
Yeah.
They're ripping off the idea and making it big and accessible in some way.
Yeah. That one was like
Alice
a
in
virtual
Borderland.
reality thing.
It was virtual reality, but they were actually dying. Alice in Borderland.
That's it.
That was the weird
Borderland.
surreal aspect. It's a great show in my opinion.
That's it.
But no, I haven't seen Squid Game yet. In holiday news, it is Healthcare Aid Day, also National Chocolate Cupcake Day. There you go. Probably shouldn't combine those. If you eat too many if you eat too many chocolate cupcakes, probably you're gonna need some healthcare. Is my point. Anyway, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Although they're delicious. But Jamarl, what were you thinking?
What do you mean?
Just in general. I could take us somewhere, but I was kind of rambling all over the place for a little while there. And often when we go into our first bit here, you're like, there's a story I want to talk about because there's something that wasn't wrapped into the headlines,
So let's see. The Azerbaijan one is interesting. The China launch. The China launch thing is fascinating to me. I mean, they basically look. If you are the U.S. and you're going to be a superpower, and you're going to try to project force and strength in this kind of full spectrum dominance across the world, you cannot be shocked that other countries try to find ways to mitigate your, belligerence. And why would you be shocked? China is 1.5 million people at this point. They've been sending rockets to the dark side of the moon and beyond. They sent up 3 astronauts, yesterday? They've been working closely with Russia on all sorts of space technology, including trying to put a base on the moon on Mars or around Mars. Their capability here is clearly significant, right? And so if they are under threat, like any other country that was under threat, and they had the capability of doing something about it, they would. In the same way that the United States is like, we want to show our space weapons to kind of, wave our fists at the world and make them take notice. Well, China is doing something similar by having a missile, hypersonic, to go around the globe. And they were like, whoa, I can't believe those guys did that. Well, yeah. If you keep screwing with them, they're going to try to find ways to mitigate the fact that you're screwing with them. And in the same way we want to beat our chests and show our gonads to the world, well, China is doing something similar with the basic response of don't mess with us. Hashtag, period. It's that. And so it's like they're not doing this for no reason when they're showing the thing of them knocking a satellite out of the sky. They're not doing it for no reason.
Yes.
They're doing it to get across the point. Leave us to our own devices. And how many dead Americans do you want to accept for Taiwan or whatever other war or conflict you're trying to create in this particular area of the globe? That's the way I take it. I thought, I was like, wow. It's not that I was shocked that they had the capability of doing it. I mean, at this point, Russia, China, even North Korea has their, hypersonic missiles, and the United States is supposed to be building their own. But from a technological capability of being able to do it, it is significant.
Impressive.
Yeah, very impressive, to put it mildly.
It is, even though they've denied that it was, I don't know exactly which part of it they denied, but they said that some of the reporting on it was wrong, that it was a routine test, that kind of thing. Yeah, but
either way,
they could just be the kind of thing they need to say, and or the kind of thing they think might be funny to say. Well, they know that everybody's scrambling to address the reality of what it was, which is a test of, I don't know exactly what payload.
I don't think they put a missile on it. I think they were just saying it's nuclear capable.
And I don't know what payload it would be capable of carrying, which is where it would weigh on that. It might not be able to carry anything, although it probably would. But I'm out of my depth here, is my point. But it's impressive.
It is an impressive feat of technology, to put it mildly. So, be warned. Be warned. They're not going to take it lying down.
Yes.
I mean, in their heads. I mean, because on some level, their economic might almost demands a military might to protect the economics of it all. And so China doesn't have a huge number of bases around the world. I think the United States has nearly 1,000. And so all of this talk about, they're getting more aggressive. It's like, dude, you have 1,000 military bases. You're creating deals with Australia and the UK. Neither of which, the UK is nowhere near China. The United States is nowhere near China. Australia has them as their main trading partner. But still, you're creating these deals and agreements and alignments with all of these countries around the world, including having the CIA basically focus on them. But you're shocked that they would do anything to mitigate the emphasis that you're putting on preventing their economic increase or their economic expansion. I mean, it's just weird. The propaganda doesn't even entirely make sense when you sit down and think about it. But China, leave us to our own devices. That's basically what China's saying.
Yeah.
Well, let's do this. Let's take us out. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
Radio Sputnik.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the D.C. area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. As I mentioned earlier this morning, tomorrow will be representing Radio Sputnik at a press conference, the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena and Nuclear Weapons Witness Testimony. This is going to be at the National Press Club. The key speaker is going to be Bob Celayas, and he's going to talk about basically his story as he was running a nuclear facility. A glowing thing comes out. His people gets freaked out, and the missiles, one after the next, start to shut down, something that's supposed to be impossible based on the way that these things are wired. The whole point is strike capacity, meaning if anything happens to one or two missiles, the other missiles still have the capacity to go. In this situation, all of them went down. On this channel, I think I've done a great job in presenting all sorts of people to kind of make the case that there is indeed a there. We've had Tom Whitmore from MUFON. We've had Nick Pope from Ministry of Defense in the UK. We've had Luis Elizondo, who is basically director of ATIP. We've had multiple journalists, one of which broke the story on the USS Kidd and Raphael and events that were taking place off the coast of California. We've even had godfathers of the UFO community, even though some of the stuff they said was out there, Grant Cameron and Stephen Bassett, who apparently I'm on bad terms with right now. But nevertheless, the point that I'm making here is we've done a pretty decent job of being rational, honest, and straightforward on the information that is coming out on this subject matter. And this is just another item to that. We're beyond the point of the question of whether it's real or not. At this point, the governmental structure itself has transformed and changed itself to accommodate this issue. Media has accommodated this issue. Representative Ruben Gallego, National Defense Authorization Act Amendment on Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. And keep in mind, this is the first time that they've put something like this in legislation. Gallego wrote this. He put out this statement. It is in the national security interest of the United States to know what is flying in our skies, whether emerging tech from strategic competitors and adversaries or aerial phenomena from unknown origin. Our military must have full intelligence picture and the tools to respond quickly to these potential threats. My amendment creates a permanent office at the Department of Defense to comprehensively evaluate UAPs, and I am proud to announce its inclusion in the House version of the National Defense Authorization Act. This is Representative Ruben Gallego, chairman of the Subcommittee on Intelligence and Special Operations. The approved amendment requires the Secretary of Defense to, 1, establish an office to carry out the mission currently performed by the UAP Task Force in coordination with the Office of Director of National Intelligence, submit an annual report on unidentified aerial phenomena, and terminate the UAP Task Force. Don't need it anymore since the office is going to be directly under the Department of Defense. This is no longer a question of whether there's a there. That there has basically been answered. And not just answered, your governmental structure itself, for better or for worse, is conforming in order to deal with that issue. This is going to spur certain scientific research. This is going to spur certain investigations and, of course, details and information released to the public on all of this that's going on. I guess the point I'm making here is the truth is out there. And yet we have no idea what that truth is. And we're being presented with a huge question mark as a globe, beyond the petty squabbles, beyond the fighting that takes place, beyond the divisions that are created among the various countries and everything else. We are being presented with a question of existence. Existential even. This notion of what does it mean to be a person, or what does it mean to be a human being in the context of what seems to be something that is taking place on a larger scale that is affecting all of us. More important to this point, what is on the other side of this answer? Meaning they're putting a box on the table of our world, and that box has a ton of question marks all around that box. And I don't mean it to be like the Riddler, even though I guess that's the first thing that comes to mind. But that box is basically something that the government has put there and has been sitting there. And it's within our eyesight. People can see it. They can hear it. They have people talking about it. There's still these kind of press that's coming up. Elizondo was on a press conference the other day making a point of saying the videos that are released are like the least intriguing of the videos that we've seen. Yeah, we have some pretty high detail footage of the things that we're seeing and everything else. No, that stuff is not being released. And yes, that stuff is totally classified. But the point I'm making here, though, is we're being presented with the question as a world. And what's on the other side of that question is utterly and entirely profound. Whether it's us, whether it's not us, the answer to that question is profound. Because basically what is on the other side of that question is a new, fundamentally different world. And it's one, I got to be honest, that I can't even necessarily conceive of. Meaning, what happens to your world if these guys come out and say, it's not us? Definitively, it's not us, in the way that Romney or some of these other guys have said it. Let's play the clip of Ratcliffe. This is DNI, Director of National Intelligence, former Director of National Intelligence Ratcliffe, making the exact same point just before the report came out from the Office of Director of National Intelligence to Congress. Let's play the clip.
Well, sure. We have lots of reports about what we call unidentified aerial phenomenon. And this actually is a program that's been in place for a few years in terms of a task force that has been there under the National Defense Authorization Act. But as you correctly point out, Maria, there's now a report that will be issued by the Pentagon, by the Secretary of Defense and the Director of National Intelligence. I actually wanted to get this information out and declassified before I left office, but we weren't able to get it down into an unclassified format that we could talk about quickly enough. But frankly, there are a lot more sightings than have been made public. Some of those have been declassified. When we talk about sightings, we're talking about objects that have been seen by Navy or Air Force pilots or have been picked up by satellite imagery that, frankly, engage in actions that are difficult to explain, that movements that are hard to replicate, that we don't have the technology for, or traveling at speeds that, exceed the sound barrier without a sonic boom. So, in short, things that we are observing that are difficult to explain. And so, there's actually quite a few of those, and I think that information is being gathered and will be put out in a way that the American people can see. We always, when we see these things, Maria, we always look for a plausible explanation. Weather can cause disturbances, visual disturbances. Sometimes we wonder whether or not our adversaries have technologies that are a little bit further down the road than we thought or that we realized. But there are instances where we don't have good explanations for some of the things that we've seen. And, when that information becomes declassified, I'll be able to talk a little bit more about that.
Can you tell us where it was seen?
Actually, all over the world. There have been sightings all over the world. And when we talk about sightings, the other thing I will tell you is it's not just a pilot or just a satellite or some intelligence collection. Usually we have multiple sensors that are picking up these things. And so, again, some of this are just they're unexplained phenomenon. And there's actually quite a few more than have been made public. So I think it'll be healthy for as much of this information to get out there as possible so that the American people can see some of the things that we've been dealing with.
Of course, it's not just Ratcliffe, Romney. You've had Marco Rubio. You've had Gallego, this other gentleman. Congress has been getting briefs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I guess my thing is, we are being presented with a question. What does our world look like when gravity is one of those things that can be manipulated for either travel or for some kind of weapons technology? Or for that matter, what does it look like when we come to contact with this notion of consciousness as being something more than just it's in our heads, but we're finding that there's the ability or capability for tech to interact with it, or even getting a larger context on the way we kind of function as human beings? What does it mean when we find out, at the very least, that either we're not alone or that there's various actors with technology that is just remarkable and mind-blowing? And between those two, I got to be honest, I lean towards the side of I don't believe we're alone. Either way, whatever is on the other side of that question is going to be astonishing and profound. And Fault Lines will be your front lines to try to give you honest, rational takes on everything that's being exposed. The truth is out there. Our job is to figure out what it is. Shane, what are your thoughts? All of this stuff is breaking. The UAP nuclear weapons thing should take place tomorrow. I guess we're going to see what's going on with that. And I'm hoping that there's media that gets involved where they're actually doing the investigation and saying, okay, is this guy right? Was he actually working here? Did this particular thing really take place? And going beyond just, because you're right. There may be things where it's like, okay, this stuff is being covered up, so nothing to be said here. But I'm hoping that the cover-up can't get rid of all of just, okay, is there a work order to repair the nuclear weapons? Is there a time frame where these guys were down? Even if it's like, oh, there was a maintenance check for all of these. Like, okay, fair enough. It's meaning there should be details and information that kind of gives this kind of trail of, okay, this did happen, and yeah, these guys are trying to cover it up.
That corroborates it.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm hoping that takes place. That it's not just, oh, that's interesting, and they just kind of move on. Because the story is too big for them to let go. I mean, if indeed there's something that was floating out there that shut down our nuclear weapons, now, I don't consider that hostile. I consider it kind of like, hey, you guys need to cut that out. That's the way I take that. But, of course, the military is going to take that as, how dare you shut down our nuclear missiles? It's a Superman thing. Should Superman throw the nuclear missiles into the sun? Well, that's an act of war if Superman does that, regardless. But no, I'm just making the point that all of the stuff that's coming out now, this is basically fitting within that. And we are being posed with a question as a globe and as a planet, not just individuals. This is happening all over the world. And if so, I guess the thing is, what is that question, for one? And what does it look like on the other side of the answer to that question, whatever that answer is, for better or for worse? Don't know, but it is profound, to put it mildly.
Yeah, we don't have any kind of frame of reference for how this question gets answered exactly.
We don't even know what the question is. I mean, that's the other part. It's like the truth is out there, but the truth to what? Like, what is the thing that we're being asked? Is it just, are we alone? Is it that? Is it, what is humanity's stake in the universe as a whole? Is it that? I mean, all of these things, I think, are kind of on the table, and we don't have a frame of reference for it.
I feel like there should be like a period of like a year-long national holiday or something, just praising all the people who said aliens existed and were disbelieved
for like 80 years,
decades. Exactly. Yeah. There's something like that. If that comes out, there needs to be some period of national remembrance of how right they were and wrong literally everybody else was. That's justice.
Well, let me ask you this. If they do come out with that, let's say they do reports and everything else, and they're like, look, dude, this is not us. Just like everything that they were saying, either Radcliffe, Romney, the guys who were briefed in Congress and all, they was like, look, this is not us. We don't believe it's anybody else. Should they be prosecuted for lying? Meaning, if there was a concerted effort for like 80 years where these guys were basically lying, should there be some kind of, repudiation, or should there be some kind of consequence for basically covering this stuff up as opposed to exposing it to the American public for all of that time?
I don't know. You got to get some answer, some sense of why they were covering it up,
Well, that part too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, what is the answer to that? What if they say, like, that's what I mean. Like, all of those things are question marks. They could have said, look, we were doing this for the best interest of the country. We didn't believe it needed to be told, et cetera, et cetera.
What if we never find out? What if this is just a flash in the pan, and then they get a little bit of attention, and then for whatever reason, this has just appeared and then just goes away, and there's not any explanation of it, actually.
Do you think that's possible for this one? I mean,
yeah.
Because that's what took place in the 60s and 70s, basically.
Yeah, totally. There's nothing that would make that impossible here.
Yeah, where it just fades into the... I think the problem is you've had so many people come out. You've had so many things of like weapon systems and everything else. You've had Nimitz. I don't know. You've just had so many people to come out, and some of these people were mainstream. Romney,
I feel like people are eminently distractible. And if a big event came up in a couple of years, we'd stop talking about it. Then we would be back to the status quo, maybe a little bit of a deviation, but mostly back to the status quo, where people are like, if you bring up an alien, you're kind of a little bit weird, a little bit out there, which is the take that a lot of people have. You know what I mean? Because they're a little bit outside of the zone of acceptability.
I guess the thing is, what would need to happen for people to be like, as a shadow of a doubt, like zero shadow of a doubt, for them to be like, okay, that's not us. Because that's all it would take, right? I mean, I agree with you that people can get into this kind of distracted thing. I don't agree with you that they would be like, okay, that stuff is weird. It's just too much has happened. I think they would accept it and just kind of just move on with the acceptance of it.
I think that people are able to undergo that kind of cognitive dissonance. We can do that kind of thing.
Well, you heard Romney. It's not China. It's not Russia. It's not us.
Yeah, because going back to your metaphor, it's like this big black box, and we, there's this big box that they have out. Everybody's aware of. The box keeps moving. It keeps twitching. They say there are no animals in it. It's like, no, there's nothing in there. There's no, we don't know what's in there.
We don't know this in it.
It's definitely there. It's definitely not an animal.
Yeah.
It's definitely not a cold-blooded or a warm-blooded creature. It's definitely not that kind of thing. And then it's left to us to speculate whether or not it's like a ghost or something that's making the box move in all these different ways. But what it could be, of course, is that they've raised an attack dog, and they don't want anybody to know that what they've raised is an attack dog inside the box.
Yeah.
But maybe what we're seeing here is an actual UFO. I don't want to dismiss it as a ghost. And for all I know, ghosts are real. I don't want to dismiss any of it.
Well, I think that's the catch, right?
We can move on in a couple of years, theoretically, if this falls out. I have no idea about what. Say it's a yes, and there's a real something here, and we're going to find out about it. That all bets are off. That's an event horizon or a singularity. I don't know what's on the other side, but say first, I could see us pulling back and just being like, well, we move on, we forget about it, we don't talk about how we don't talk about it anymore. But people are able to undergo enough cognitive dissonance, and they will induce it in themselves if they don't get answers, because otherwise it's like,
how long can you just keep the question?
Keep the question going, and why do you keep asking it? It sounds a little bit weird that you keep asking that question. Why are you obsessed with this? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
No,
I understand that. I'm skeptical that people can move on where they would regress into something else. I think they would move on with the kind of knowledge of, all right, that's weird. We think there's something there. Because the majority of people would say, yeah, we think the government is lying about UFOs. That's, when they're doing the polling. But no, I agree with you that they probably couldn't move on. It's like, all right, I got to pay for this. I got to do this. This is taking place.
Yeah.
And this thing would just kind of sit there. It's just a box where they're just aware of, but they're not necessarily actively engaging.
That old box on the shelf we polish occasionally, bring down and to distract the newcomers. To the
Man, I hope that is not what takes place. And just from the thrust and energy that has been put into this notion of trying to throw open the books and stuff like that. I mean, the moment that you get New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, you get all of these guys coming out with that stuff, and you get people behind the scenes saying, yes, this was the ship, this was the person, this was the individual, these were the guys who were saying, like, that stuff is so much data and so much information. But look, I agree with you. It takes something that is so significant and profound that the people shake out of like, whoa, I did, that's a real thing, and feel it in the way that they feel money when they spend it on something. That is a new world. And I don't know what that world looks like. And by the way, even if it's us, it's still a new world, because what they're talking about from the level of technology, science, expansion, engineering, and everything else is just utterly profound from where we typically are. So, look, I agree with you. I don't know what's in that box. That box is shaking and moving, but I have zero idea what's in it. I do know what comes on the other side of the question once it's answered is a different world. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back with the one and only Ted Rall, talking Bernie Sanders taking the gloves off. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories, where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show.
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. Well, the gloves are off. The gloves are completely and totally off. Bernie Sanders basically wrote an op-ed in West Virginia, aiming take it aim at basically Joe Manchin's reluctance to back the president's and the constituents of the country's and his party's agenda for his Build Back Better plan, the $3.5 trillion reconciliation plan. Of course, Joe Manchin didn't necessarily like this, and Joe Manchin basically called him an outsider and an independent socialist, making the point that Sanders doesn't know what it's like in West Virginia. That said, Manchin has also gone further and basically is trying to strip out any notion of climate change legislation in his bill, while he takes a huge amount of money from basically the people who also want the climate change legislation taken out. The bill, right now, Build Back Better is still in limbo without the capability of passing the House. To have a conversation about this, we're joined with the one and only Ted Rall. Ted Rall is a political cartoonist and syndicated columnist. Ted, thank you for joining us.
Anytime, gentlemen.
So, what do you think about that? I mean, to me, that attack, or at the very least the emphasis, should have been put on Manchin and Sinema early on, meaning not several months into this, like we're 4 months in. And it's almost as if Biden was like, I can sweet talk him. I can sweet talk him into, well, no, that didn't work. And so now Sanders has gotten that much more aggressive and has started to push heavily on these guys to basically say, look, Manchin is a problem. He needs to get on board. The people in West Virginia are being adversely affected by his inability to get on board with this presidential agenda. I guess the question is it going to work, for one? And what does this mean that these guys are in open hostilities in this way? And I guess the biggest point, shouldn't have this started earlier?
Well, politics is hardball, so it's not surprising in that sense, but I was startled to read about Bernie's publication in West Virginia. I thought, this is crossing some sort of line of gentility and civility in the Senate, and I'm not surprised that Manchin took umbrage. It's personal. It's like, hey, I'm going into your turf, and I'm going to attack you on your home territory. And he was probably like, WTF?
Yeah, yeah.
No doubt about it. And also my other observation was, Manchin's use of some seriously loaded language there about outsiders that harkens back to, what Southern Democrats, racist Dixiecrats used to call civil rights workers outside agitators. That was a serious wolf whistle, political whistle there, dog whistle. And it was, I was like, wow, nobody's calling him out on the use of this racially loaded rhetoric. It definitely, everyone in West Virginia who heard that term knew exactly what Manchin was talking about. So, Bernie went deep behind enemy lines, and Manchin got annoyed and kind of got exposed for who and what he is. But it also is a reflection of just how frustrated, not just Bernie, but the mainstream of the Democratic Party is with Manchin. I don't think Bernie would have done this without the approval of the White House. This had to be something that got signed off upon at the highest levels.
You think so?
And
I get this feeling that Biden is just checked out of this.
If you're right, then a lot of people are probably happy about it, because this is what I saw people calling for Biden and the rest of the Democrats to do, was to really go after Manchin. If this is the guy who's keeping your agenda from going through, if he's turning coat on your party, then go after him, even if it means going into his home state and forcing him to make these weird asides about outside agitators, like these kind of racially overthrown callback kind of things or whatever. This is what people want from Biden, right, Ted?
Well, when we say Biden, remember, we always have to say, Biden asterisk, not Biden himself personally, but, the president that we think of as Biden, a.k.a. the people who actually run the country, whose name we don't talk about, his White House staff.
The composite entity known as Biden. You're talking about him as if he's like a zombie or like some sort of hive mind, and I completely get why, Ted.
That would be correct. So, yes, so Biden, in scare quotes, yes, I think this was signed off, and I said the White House, not Biden. Yeah, I think the White House signed off on this. I think this would have been viewed as more than a shot across the bow, but just, it's the eruption of hostilities. It's Fort Sumter. This is, it's very. There was a danger that this would cause Manchin to just say, okay, fine, I'm walking away. I'm saying no forever. Forget it. We're not negotiating anymore. You don't take that risk until you think you don't have much to lose if you don't.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you on that. I guess my thing is, should have been done earlier. And not just earlier, why just Sanders? Like, if it was indeed the White House's purview that this is a great idea and everything else, and Sanders kind of got their approval, I got to be honest, I don't think he got their approval. I think the White House is somewhat checked out. I think they want it, yes, and they get on some level that Biden's approval rating, his polling, his capability to get reelected, all of that stuff is dependent upon whether or not he can get something accomplished now. Because if you go into the midterms and he loses either the House or the Senate, that's it. His agenda over with. And so everything that they're going to get, they have to get it now and they have to get it this month. Why just Sanders? If indeed the White House was like, yeah, good job, go get him, shouldn't there have been far more condemnation of Manchin in West Virginia by other members of the party? Or is it just one person enough?
Oh, I think it makes perfect sense. First of all, it's not in this particular instance. It's not just Sanders. It's Sanders representing the entirety of the 48 U.S. senators who want this thing to pass, right? And they chose Sanders, and Sanders is willing to do it.
I know, but Sanders is not even a Democrat. That's kind of the point I'm getting at. He's an independent. Like, shouldn't it? It's one thing for I do get it, right? That it's like, okay, Sanders is the voice in this case, but I think the voice has a little bit stronger if it was coming from another Democrat as opposed to an independent.
First of all, I've been saying that Sanders is an independent in name only, right? He's not. Everyone thinks of him as a Democrat. He ran as a Democrat. I bet 99% of Americans have no idea that he's technically an independent. He doesn't just caucus with the Democrats. He is a Democrat. I mean, the independent stuff is just, again, an asterisk that most people aren't aware of. And he is clear. And I think, but it does also kind of give the DNC coverage. It gives the party coverage to say, well, we'll have Bernie do it. Bernie will do the wet ops here and take out Manchin from inside his own state, because we can't control Bernie. He's rogue. He's crazy. Woo! You never know what those Vermonters will do. I think it does give them political cover, and of course, Manchin isn't stupid. He knows exactly what's happening. But for his supporters in West Virginia, it helps confuse things.
It's very aggravating. And part of me wants to say, I take umbrage, would you call Bernie Sanders a Democrat? But I totally get your point. I just think the strength of the remarks are stronger if it was coming from this other Democrat. Meaning, at this point, they have a couple of weeks before they have to get this done. I think they're trying to get it done by October 31st. You don't have a lot of time. And Sinema is apparently making a ton of money, killing. Like, for the last 3 months, she's been getting a ton of cash from people who are basically against the plan. She's been teaching classes on fundraising and how to be corrupt, in addition to basically blowing off some of the negotiations in order to go get more money from these fundraising events. And Manchin has been more open to saying, okay, I don't want the environmental stuff, I don't want this other stuff, but basically wants to cut the bill down to 1.5 trillion or something to that effect. Let's play Sanders. This is Sanders talking to Anderson Cooper on what he's willing to accept for the bill itself. Let's play the clip.
Where do you see this moving, though? I mean, again, it comes down right now to Sinema and Manchin. They seem to have a lower number, certainly. If it gets down to just, what is the number, priorities do have to be, there have to be some priorities.
Well,
no?
Again, I think, I'm not going to negotiate on TV.
I didn't expect
but I think there is going but there is going to have to be some give and take. But let's be clear. We started this process in the Senate Budget Committee, which I chair, at a $6 trillion amount, which, by the way, is the least of what we need if we are, in fact, going to transform our energy system and deal with the existential threat of climate. All right, we came down from 6 to 3.5 trillion. Okay, that is a huge, huge compromise. So I think, at the very least, in my view, we have got to be at 3.5 trillion. Here's the problem that we're facing. I don't begrudge Senator Sinema or Senator Manchin their views. They are more than entitled to their views. Everybody has a different point of view, that's fine. But what I do think is simply unfair is that two members of the Senate think that they have a right to obstruct what the overwhelming majority of the American people want, what the president wants, and what 48 out of 50 members, 96% of the U.S. Senate, and about an equal number in the House. That's just not right. I could go forward to Senator Schumer, any member of the Senate, say, you know, Chuck, if you don't put this thing in there, I'm out. I'm not going to vote for it. But that's not right. What we have to do is work together. I'm chairman of the committee. I have heard from zillions of members. And we're trying to work this out. At the end of the day, I hope and expect that we will.
What do you think, Ted, on those comments?
Well, again, every time I hear Bernie, I'm like, God, why is he not our president?
Yeah.
Okay, that said, it's the end. The conclusion of that clip does kind of make me a little squeamish. By the same standard, if you're one of 12 jurors who think that the defendant is not guilty, Bernie's saying, well, it's just not right for you not to vote guilty along with the other 11 jurors, because after all, you're obstructing the will of the jury. If that's, standing on principle, even if your principles are, let's just say, principles I disagree with, it doesn't, isn't a bad thing. And if Manchin and Sinema, want to go to the mat and say, hey, I'm just voting no matter what, and this thing is just never going to pass, or it's going to pass, at 1 trillion or some ridiculously low number if you want my vote, that is entirely their prerogative as members of the U.S. Senate. They don't owe the other 48 senators their votes. They can negotiate for them. And I think anybody who would, I think when Sinema and Manchin hear that kind of talk, they're thinking that. I don't think it's a matter of principle. Jamarl, as you mentioned, Sinema seems to be principal and her seem to not be good friends. Joe Manchin, I was reading over the weekend how he wants to make sure to kill, and the Biden administration has agreed to get rid of the climate change stuff from the bill. I'm like, what's he going to come up? He's literally against the planet. But like, what's next? He's going to be against kittens and mom. It's really crazy. I mean, West Virginia is one of the states that's going to be the most affected by climate change, or already is. So it's kind of just baffling. But I think they're going to. The thing that's frustrating, I think, to the 48 who are to the party itself is like, look, these guys aren't really naming. They don't seem to be naming a number. They don't seem to be saying which parts of the bill they're willing to go with, and they're just dragging their feet. And while this is happening, as I've heard other commentators say, it is true. Biden is bleeding out. His polls are slowly sinking, and this is the only plus side I can see to it. Is that if some kind of substantial legislation passes belatedly, it will pass belatedly closer to the midterms, which means the memory of it will be a little bit sharper in when the voters go to the polls next fall. That would be kind of a two wrongs make a right scenario, but you kind of have to stretch to see that.
It also seems to me that they might not be selling this bill to maybe each other, but the American public generally all that well. I don't know really that much about what's in it, and I've looked into it, but this comes up. Michael Goodwin, we were talking about this last time. They don't really talk about that. They talk about the number. They talk about the 3.5 trillion versus the 1 point something, or the 1 trillion on Manchin's end. But the contents in terms of making a sales pitch, and you can hear it with Bernie there. I'm used to the Bernie of the 2016 election, who's constantly speaking to an audience. Granted, that's not the setting that he was in necessarily in the interview there. But he's constantly speaking to an audience about, things they want, things they recognize on policy issues specifically. And that didn't really come up in that conversation. He's talking inside baseball in terms of what other senators want and how they should be coming along and the number value and how he wants a higher number value. But he's not going into what's in the bill itself, which seems like bad salesmanship. But that seems to hold for how I see other people talking about it. They're not actually pitching the bill, Ted. That's what I'm seeing.
Shane, you're 100% right. I mean, basically, they're asking the American people to support this nebulous blob of legislation. Nobody knows what the hell it is. Even for people like us whose job it is to know what's in it, we have to do a deep dive, and it seems to change every day. Just, vote for this big thing. It's going to help people. Maybe you'll be one of them. It's not much of a sales pitch.
Yeah.
Ted, I want to move over to another story that basically came out that I saw over the weekend, having to do with Joe Biden. Like you said, Joe Biden is under stress. He's basically bleeding out from inability to get anything accomplished. I mean, it looks pretty bad, not to mention the supply chain breaks, and now he has to explain, okay, well, we're not going to get this done until next year. All of these things, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's the COVID stuff, Biden is not necessarily having an easy time of it. He's not necessarily able to distract the public, with legislation. And so Sinema and Manchin are basically killing his presidency and basically attacking and inheriting many of the other ones with it. The thing I want to get to is the way Biden frames this. So let's listen to this clip. This is Biden basically shouting at the top of his lungs about there are fewer democracies. And it's like, what? And why is this your pitch? Let's play this clip.
We have fewer democracies in the world today than we did 15 years ago. Fewer. Not more, fewer. Cannot be sustained. That's why from day one of my administration, I've taken concrete steps to put human rights back at the center of our foreign policy and reassert our moral leadership on the global stage. To lead, as Chris has so often heard me say, with the power of our example, not the example of our power. Chris and I served in the Foreign Relations Committee. We excoriated abuses elsewhere in the world and called for action overseas. But human rights, in some ways, stood apart from the domestic struggle of civil rights and civil liberties and equal justice here at home. Today, we know that our efforts to defend human rights around the world are stronger because we recognize our own historic challenges as part of that same fight. Leading by example means taking action at home to renew and defend our own democracy, to advance equity and promote justice, to defend the sacred right to vote in free, fair, and secure elections. Leading by example means not pretending that our history has been perfect, but demonstrating how strong nations speak honestly about the past and uphold the truth and strive to improve. We make the best case
Let's stop here for a moment, because he's going a bit far. Look, I don't know when that example was supposed to be set, whether it was after the killing and that drone strike of those men or those women and children, or for that matter, whether it's the shipping all those Haitians out to a country that many of them hadn't been in for years. He seems a bit unhinged here. And the entire point that I kind of want to make here is that Biden, for the longest time, for his entire presidency, has basically shaped his entire framing of rhetoric around this notion of democracy versus what he considers autocracy. And in this contest, even the framing of the reason why he's doing the Build Back Better is even built within framing of that. We need to show that democracies can work. We need to invest in ourselves. We need to et cetera, et cetera. But it's not, we need to invest in ourselves for the betterment of ourselves. It's more so we need to invest in ourselves to be able to compete with China and Russia and other countries in the coming century. He seems a bit unhinged here. I mean, he's basically screaming and bangs his fists on the table, talking about there are fewer democracies. How do you take this? I mean, the man's polling is falling through the roof, and he's still screaming about other countries.
I'm looking at the psychological analysis. I mean, look, he didn't write the speech. It was written for him. He's just reading it. And, you know, this is a guy who's been in public life since the 1970s, since before you guys were born.
That's right.
And he's literally doesn't know how to hit the points of the speech that require emphasis harder than the parts that don't. I mean, you know, I don't know if he ever knew that, although I think he kind of did in the 80s or whatever, but he doesn't now. And that says a lot about his mental state and where he's at and his ability to frame things. You know, before you played that clip, you mentioned the supply chain issue. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I kind of wanted to just revisit it. It's really puzzling that the administration even raised this issue because it's not the kind of thing that voters blame on the president. They don't think, you know, this is not like if people have a hard time buying Christmas presents because Amazon tells them it's going to take 3 months for that new toy to arrive. Nobody's thinking, oh, my God, Biden, what a jerk. Why didn't he do something about the supply chain? They're just thinking, well, unemployment, a lot of people aren't at work, short staffing, COVID. They're not blaming the White House. And yet the White House kind of took ownership of it, which would be intelligent if they could come out and say, there was a problem and we solved it, and now you can thank us. But instead they're saying, there was a problem, we're going to try to solve it, and then they don't solve it. It's literally taking ownership of a problem that nobody was blaming you for. Why would you do that?
I don't know why they would do that. I mean, I remember Buttigieg came out and said, it's going to be 2022 before the supply chains change. But is it true, though, that they don't blame the White House for stuff like that? I mean, if Biden said nothing about it, and Republicans are saying, we can't even get our supplies in, because of the supply chain breaks, doesn't it implicate Biden just by definition? I mean, it's like the buck stops with the president on pretty much everything. Will this be something that they basically attach to Biden, whether he says something or not? Because I agree with you. I don't think he would have said something if he thought he could get away without them going after him for it.
Maybe. I mean, the thing is, it's kind of like if the Democratic Party has disintegrated to the point where they think they have to take the blame for things before the Republicans blame them for it, then I don't even know what to say. But it hadn't happened yet. This was something. It just seemed like an unforced error.
Yeah.
And that speech is an example. Again, it reminds me of the quote of the Jimmy Carter's malaise speech.
Mm-hmm.
It's like which I think actually didn't include the word malaise.
But Carter's speech was actually quite good and on point, even though they hated him for it.
Right, but it's kind of like, okay, so you're now going to announce to the world that there are fewer democracies under your watch, and so you're again going to take responsibility for something that kind of the U.S. certainly has a major role in because it props up dictatorships all over the place.
Right.
But people aren't thinking about much, and so what people are thinking about. I mean, it's kind of like, well, they're just not focused on it. Again, the administration is taking responsibility for things that the voters are not focused on, and taking a hit for no reason, while they're letting more important issues sort of slide. I mean, like health care, minimum wage, college expenses. These are all things that Americans think about every single day.
Nobody's thinking about, we have fewer democracies. Nobody's thinking about that. Like, it's out of touch.
Totally. It's totally theoretical and airy and strange.
And yet, this is where his head was focused from the beginning. I mean, it's a very odd thing. It's like you have your polling numbers falling through the roof and you're screaming on stage that there are fewer democracies. The country doesn't care, dude. I mean, what the country cares about is, like you made the point. Hey, am I going to get health care? Are you going to be able to negotiate the price of drugs, et cetera, et cetera? Those are the items that are basically in his bill. But he keeps framing this as if we need to do this bill to compete with China, as opposed to we need to do this bill because this is in the best interest of the country. And so he keeps bringing up the R-talking and the competition thing. Yeah, I think it's so misplaced, or at the very least, it's so out of touch with what the American public is thinking about. And I would even make the point, and I'll just ask you, do you think that's part and parcel to why his polling is dropping? Not just, in general, not just it's among independents, blacks, Hispanics, across the board. Biden has lost like 20 points within 2 months among African-American voters.
I do think it's part of it. I mean, look at the infrastructure bill. Child care is huge, right? One of the big reasons there's a labor shortage is because a lot of people can't get affordable child care. This bill would try to solve that problem. They're not talking about that in the way that they should be. There should be ads on television, on the internet, all over the place talking about, like, hey, we're going to let people go back to work who need to get back to work because they're working moms or dads. But they can't get child care for less than they earn at work. We're going to pay you more. We're going to make child care affordable. But they're not talking about any of that stuff. I think the president's polling numbers would be falling no matter what. Historically,
Ted, we're going to have to leave this here. But totally agree with you. And thank you for coming on The Voice. You guys are listening to Ted Rawl, political cartoonist and syndicated columnist. You can follow Ted on Twitter at Ted Rawl and read his cartoons at rawl.com. Fault Lines, Thomas Stranahan, back in a moment.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I'm your ever vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
That would strongly imply that you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, let's get to the headlines. In the news, yesterday in the United States, there were 22,152 new COVID cases reported, along with 1,528 deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of about 83,576 cases per day, a decrease of 22% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 57% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 66% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 44,914,859 human beings in the United States and has killed an unfortunate 724,499 men, women, and children in this country. In August, age 30 to 49, in August, people aged 30 to 49 were 37 times more likely to die from COVID if they hadn't been vaccinated than if they had. That number is astonishing. We also have Russia's total number of coronavirus infections has topped 8 million, more than 5% of the population, as the daily infection total hits another record. There's been this conversation about vaccinating kids and whether or not the FDA is going to give approval to vaccinations for kids 5 to, I believe, 12 or something to that effect. Let's play Biden. Biden is basically making the point, they're saying 66 million unvaccinated. There's still 66 million unvaccinated people, even though the number has greatly improved, and that they're trying to get approval for children to get vaccines. Let's play the clip.
We're down to 66 million, still unacceptably high number of unvaccinated people from almost 100 million in July. That's important. It's important progress. But now's not the time to let up. We have a lot more to do. First, we have to do more to vaccinate the 66 million unvaccinated people in America. It's essential. The Labor Department is going to soon be issuing an emergency rule for companies with 100 or more employees to implement vaccination requirements among their workforce. Second, we're going to continue protecting the vaccinated. This week, the Food and Drug Administration and the FDA is reviewing data on Moderna and Johnson & Johnson boosters. We expect a final decision from the FDA and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, in the next couple of weeks. Third point I'd like to make, we need to continue to keep our schools and our students safe. Now, I know parents out there are anxiously waiting for a vaccine for children ages 5 to 11. The good news is the FDA and outside experts from the CDC are set to make its determination as to whether the vaccine will be authorized for that age range in the next few weeks. If authorized, we are ready. We have purchased enough vaccines for all children between the ages of 5 and 11 in the United States.
We've just been given news, also, speaking of COVID, Colin Powell, first black U.S. Secretary of State, has basically died of complications dealing with COVID-19. That is massive news. Colin Powell was, at one point, considered a presidential candidate, was the most trusted man in the Bush administration, despite the issues associated with 9/11. I mean, with weapons of mass destruction and the famous United Nations speech where he's holding up the little vial of stuff that's not, plutonium or uranium. But more importantly, first black Secretary of State, well-known, well-liked, huge numbers in regards to approval ratings. Colin Powell is dead. Colin Powell is no more. Let's keep going. Ex-U.S. Air Force Captain Bob Salas claimed that he saw a UFO while a military base in Montana in 1967. He stated that it hovered over a launch-controlled capsule, shot a beam of light down, disabled 10 Minuteman intercontinental ballistic missiles. Celaya clearly sees this as a message from ETs about Earth's nuclear habits and capabilities, and will be having a press conference tomorrow at the National Press Club, discussing it with several other military leaders that are going to be there with him, to the press and to the news media. Last year, after George Floyd protests began, Professor Gordon Klein of UCLA received an email from a white student asking the professor to grade her black classmates more leniently. She reasoned this by saying, quote, "The unjust killing of black Americans by law enforcement and other whites, along with the effects of COVID-19 pandemic was having on the black community, may be causing them stress that might affect their classwork." When he refused this, the school placed the teacher on suspension. Klein is now suing the UCLA for defamation, labor law violations, breach of contract, violation of privacy, and interference with his consulting business. We spoke about this the first time around, and we could have a conversation about it when we get back, but basically his response was somewhat strange, and that was probably the thing that created the issue. I think he responded to her saying something like, well, what about racist students? Or what about whites, that they're being considered to be racist because of George Floyd, and shouldn't they also get some kind of privilege? Now, again, this was in response to her on this, but the college didn't necessarily take it lightly. That said, I don't think that comment was enough for them to basically take him down. And also asking about leniency for African Americans on this front. He should have just answered her straight and told her no and explained his reasons as to no. He didn't need to be clever with it. The cleverness is the thing that probably got him in trouble. In international news, breaking only minutes ago from RT Moscow, it has announced that it will completely suspend the operations of its mission to NATO. This comes 2 weeks after U.S.-led bloc expelled 8 Russian diplomats for alleged undisclosed espionage at the headquarters in Brussels. The NATO Information Bureau in Moscow will also be forced to shut down as part of its retaliatory measures. This also comes a few days after the U.S. basically tried to shell a ship into Russian waters and was basically rebuffed by a military presence from Russia. And so a lot of the stuff is basically coming to a head. And this is, keep in mind, after the meeting between Putin and Biden where they were supposed to be bringing down the hostilities and hysteria. Doesn't seem to be working. On Saturday, a group of 17 U.S. missionaries, including 5 children, were kidnapped by a gang in Haiti. They were on their way home from building an orphanage when they were jumped and taken. The mission's field director was not with the group at the time of the abduction and is working with the U.S. Embassy to get the rest of the group released. He stated, quote, "This is a special prayer alert. Pray that the gang members will come to repentance," unquote. I would make the point that said, God has nothing to do with this. This has everything to do with these guys and the kidnapping. And at this point, the kidnappings in Haiti have become extraordinary. There's a belief that some of the gangs that run Haiti was also working with the government, and when Movell was killed, or Hovel, I'm pronouncing his name incorrectly, but when he was basically killed, that the relationships between the gangs and the governments and everything else got reshuffled, creating this kind of spawn of kidnappings. It's unclear. And we're going to have somebody on at 8:45 to basically have a conversation about what is going on in Haiti right now with this kind of spike in kidnappings. In a UN court, Azerbaijan's deputy foreign minister has accused Armenia of ethnic cleansing and laying landmines since the end of the ceasefire late last year. Elnur Mammadov said that the landmines have killed 106 Azerbaijanis or Azeris, including 65 civilians, since the conflict ended by a Russian broker deal last year. That's an interesting one. I want to come back to it. I met somebody who was Armenian, and she was, I'll come back to it. Financial Times reported that China's launch in August of a hypersonic nuclear-capable rocket surprised many in Western intelligence. China has denied it tested a nuclear-capable hypersonic missile, with its foreign ministry spokesman saying a routine test had been carried out to test the different types of reusable spacecraft technology, saying the Financial Times reporting was flawed. The fatal stabbing of conservative member of parliament Sir David Amess on Friday is now being declared a, quote, terrorist incident, unquote. A 25-year-old man has been arrested at the scene and is currently being detained under the Terrorism Act. In tech news, on the topic of media hysteria and fake news, you may be hearing this story about Apple collaborating to create a car. From Bloomberg.com, quote, Apple's iPhone partner Foxconn unveils its first electric vehicles. And from Tech Explorer, quote, Apple supplier Foxconn unveils its electrical vehicles, unquote. In reality, though, Foxconn does not manufacture iPhones and other phone products. This deal won't be with Apple. There aren't even entirely Foxconn-owned cars. They're working with other car brands to create the electrical vehicle from their templates. Far from the iCar, as seems to be implied in the headlines. Yes, indeed. Far from the iCar. I love that. In business news, new data leaks projects that Netflix Squid Games will generate $891 million in revenue. Considering the show had a production cost of $21.4 million, Netflix hit big on the series. The only question now, I guess this goes to Shane, is do you think you survived the Squid Games? Now, you haven't seen the Squid Games. And like I said, I haven't really seen it either. I've only seen it kind of watching over my wife's shoulder. But I'm confident in myself I would go with the yes. Maybe an American version with more familiar games.
How many survive it?
I don't know.
There are like 500. One person survives that, so I would not survive.
You don't think you would make it?
Statistically speaking. Yeah, no, I would die.
This is zero confidence. Yeah, I won't make it.
It's true, man. I'm not that
excited. It's like in a zombie apocalypse, when you make it through in a zombie apocalypse. I think on the test that I took, I think I lasted for over a year. Something all right, let's keep going. Facebook announced that it's planning to hire 10,000 workers in the European Union over the next 5 years to help build the metaverse. A futuristic notion of connecting online that uses augmented and virtual reality. Facebook has been touting the creation of the metaverse as the next big thing after mobile internet. For vacation or for holidays, we have World Menopause Day and National Health Education Week. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Those are your headlines. So I was bringing up the Haiti story and the kidnapping story. Jovenel Moise, I believe that is. I think that's correct.
Jovenel Moise?
That's it.
Moise?
Yeah, the pronunciation always gets me.
Yeah, same with me, honestly.
But once he was killed by a ton of assassins, Haiti was already having difficulty, to put it mildly. But after he was killed, all sort of things just went chaotic. The stuff that I was reading over the weekend made the point that says that there was suspicion that he was connected to some of the gangs that were basically in Haiti. And that at the point where that he was killed, and you had all this kind of political intrigue to take place, that stuff got reshuffled. And when it got reshuffled, the number of kidnappings basically spiked, because at that point, the gangs didn't necessarily have any relationships with anyone there. And it's hard to get across the number of kidnappings. I mean, over the course of, let's say, a month or two, they've spiked more than, I think it was like Mexico, Colombia, and some of these other countries all combined, despite the fact that those countries are much larger than Haiti. And so the bus trip is just one. I mean, they've been taking buses. Like in one case, they took an entire bus in kidnapping. They kidnapped a cop. I mean, this has been going over preachers. They went into a church, basically kidnapped the preacher and one of the other guys in the church. And so it's not just these missionaries. This has been something that has been taking place significantly. Right here, Port-au-Prince is posting more kidnappings in absolute terms than the vast larger region of Bogota, Mexico City, and Sao Paulo combined, according to consultants that firm control risk. And I'll just read this other part. This is Washington Post. Cited with endemic poverty and violence, Haiti is no stranger to kidnapping waves. The country suffered a brutal surge from 2005 until the 2010 earthquake, which killed more than 220,000 people, but had the effect of moderating kidnapping. Well, yeah, at that point, there was the earthquake to deal with. You couldn't just go out and kidnap people. Numbers have climbed steadily in recent years as violent gangs, unchecked by the government, have seized control over key portions of the country. Basically, the government is losing control of the various regions of the country itself. The gangs have gotten that much more prominent.
And I think the government lacked control in the first place. Wasn't that part of the problem?
They call it corruption. I mean, they would call it corruption. Yeah. I guess that the government was working in tandem with some of the other groups, which I guess moderated some of the violence. It's like, all right, I'll make a deal with you. I don't want you whacking all of these people, but I'll leave you alone to your devices in this particular region. Like, oh, okay, fair enough. I'm not going to do the 20 kidnappings that I was planning because now it's easier to make it. It might be something like that. But either way, that's indicative of a lack of control, right? And so, yeah. We're sending people back to this place, by the way. Some of the people who we've evicted back to Haiti basically made the point is it is not safe to go out. It's basically playing Russian roulette every time you walk out of your house, because that's the point you can be kidnapped.
This is where I sound almost nativist or something, but shouldn't the French take them? Wasn't this like a whole big French disaster where they've been a debt colony of France for decades, right?
I think so. I want to say yes because they speak French. I want to say yes, but France at this point they've been colonizing all of these places. I mean, what was it? Algeria. They have They have several colonies that they would have to deal with.
French Indochina.
Yeah.
A lot of but the Haitians are trying to get it. I'm just saying, if they're trying to get in here, it seems more like the French historical responsibility. But whatever.
I guess the question is, how do you even fix that?
Yeah.
Let's say you're the United States, and you say, okay, these guys are on our coast, and we've been messing with them for a very long time, either influencing their politics or whatever. How would an honest actor engage this country to fix any of this?
I don't know. You know,
either.
How much would it cost, and why would you be doing it? Who would be? What's the benefit?
Yeah.
Why would a bunch of Americans want America to go in and fix this country just out of the largesse of the American spirit? I don't know.
No, they wouldn't. I mean, I'm just more curious about, like, if you had an honest actor that says, you know what, we do want to try to fix this, or we do want to help the situation. I don't know how.
The honest actor is them fixing themselves. And whatever we can do to make that happen will arguably, it's just a cost-benefit analysis of, like, I don't know, man. I don't know. There are a bunch of different ways to look. I don't think we actually have a good model for fixing failed states. I think that usually our model for fixing failed states is using them militarily as a platform. It's not actually fixing them. It's making them stable enough to serve as a platform. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't think that it's like the science that we've developed, the political science and the sociology for fixing this stuff is pointed in the wrong direction, is my understanding of the situation.
Tariq always says, hands off Haiti. But what does it mean in a situation like this?
Yeah, where you
really want hands off.
You want that. They want, in an ideal world, if everybody's helping everybody else out, they would want the help of everybody. Yeah. They, in some abstract,
especially the public, who's like terrified in their homes, thinking that they're going to be nabbed.
But years ago, I looked at this, and when I looked, the largest source of income for Haitians, and again, I can't. Years ago, I don't know if it's GDP or what exactly that I'm talking about, but was remittances. Basically, people in the States and in other countries sending money back who had emigrated from Haiti, had family there, et cetera. And some of those remittances, by the way, are for kidnapping. So for paying the ransom on a kidnapping, which has been a long-term problem in Haiti. But it doesn't surprise me. We're going to coming back on this, by the way, later on in the hour. We're going to be speaking with Jemima Pierre at 8:45. For now, though,
real quick, what do you think about the Colin Powell passing?
Colin Powell passing?
That is shocking on some level, just because he's been there forever.
He's been there forever. Man, I need to go back into my history more. Obviously, Secretary of State under Bush during the whole Iraq War stuff, and on the fact that he played a part in it. I don't like that guy.
Yeah.
Granted, I'm not the kind of person to gloat when people pass in general. He passed from COVID. I hear that's a very bad way to die in terms of asphyxiating to death, basically. So I hope that it was pleasant, and I hope that his family's doing okay.
He said he was tricked in the Bush thing. Basically, that he said that Bush and what's his name? I can't think of it.
That's what I remember, but it seems a little bit like, well, you let yourself get tricked, buddy.
Yeah.
And that's why I wanted to go back into the actual historical facts of it. Maybe do a dedicated review of that kind of thing. We could bring on Scott Ritter potentially.
Yeah, to have a conversation.
Actually,
Scott would know. Scott would know quite well.
He's been in the room with him a few times, if I remember correctly. Anyway, we need to go into a break.
Yeah.
But fascinating conversation to come back to, definitely.
He was very popular, by the way.
You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Coming back, we will be speaking with Mark Sloboda, talking about Russia, this NATO mission getting closed, according to Sergei Lavrov this morning. Also talking about this Russian destroyer, this U.S. destroyer getting shooed out of Russian waters on Friday on the other side of this weekend. Also talking about this Chinese hypersonic missile, the potential ICBM nuclear-capable missile that China, a Chinese foreign ministry spokesperson said, it's kind of been played up in the Western press. Anyway, we'll be trying to get into the truth on these stories when we come back with Mark Sloboda. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history. This week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the D.C. area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. I want to get into the headline that was just released. Russia will suspend diplomatic ties with NATO from November 1st with the U.S.-led military bloc's Moscow mission ordered to close from Sergei Lavrov. We have also had this issue that took place over the weekend or over Friday with a U.S. ship basically trying to enter the Sea of Japan in Russian waters. And I'm wondering whether all of these things are connected to one another. To have a conversation about this, we're joined with Mark Sloboda. He's an international relations and security analyst. Mark, thank you for joining us on short notice.
Jamarl, Shane, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on Fault Lines.
So I guess there are two stories on this, but we'll start with the big headline for this morning. Russia is suspending diplomatic ties with NATO from November 1st. Now, what is going on with this? Sergei Lavrov is basically the one who basically made this point, and this is starting to make headlines. What is the reasoning for Russia to basically do this? And is it connected to the ship, the warship, that Russia basically prevented the Navy destroyer from basically coming into their territorial waters? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I don't think there's any direct connection between these two incidences. The reason for Moscow suspending its mission to NATO, ending diplomatic relations with NATO, and kicking NATO's office out of Moscow is a direct response to a move by NATO just over a week ago where they expelled 8 Russian diplomats to NATO over the claims of that they were really intelligence or undeclared intelligence agents, which
basically spies.
Yeah, well, they didn't actually accuse them of espionage. They said that they were undeclared intelligence agents, and this is a mission where a lot of on both sides are military intelligence. That's who is talking to each other, and NATO, Russia there. And it was rather interesting, the circumstances in which it happened, because these people were, these Russian diplomats / undeclared espionage agents were not declared persona non grata. They were not permanently kicked out of the country the way that is usually done with espionage cases. Their credentials were simply revoked. It's quite an unusual circumstance. And that happened after a verbal, evidently a rather heated verbal disagreement between Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg on the sidelines of the UNGA meeting in New York just like a month ago. So it seems like there's more possible direct connections with that. Evidently, Russia was completely beyond the pale and accused NATO states of supporting the overthrow of the Ukrainian government involving a vanguard of neo-Nazis. But that's just crazy talk, isn't it? I mean, that's totally not, exactly what happened in Ukraine. But evidently there were some heated words over a discussion of that and several other issues, and that led, seemingly led at least directly to NATO kicking 8 Russian diplomats out of their office in Brussels, and now Russia is just fine and ending all diplomatic relations with NATO, which is, an indication that, we're not really talking to each other, constructively anyway at this point. So it is a firm response to NATO's earlier actions last week. That is for sure.
Very interesting. Makes perfect sense. Well, and also, I mean, NATO, it's not exactly a historical relic, but it kind of is. It was coming from the Cold War era, where fighting the Soviets was the way that you stuck the world together, basically, way that you kept these two blocks, way that you motivated people on the Western side, all these different things, and it genuinely a security threat, for the Eisenhower generation coming out of World War II. I get there are different sides of this, but of course, we're pivoting to China right now. And NATO is Western heavy in terms of the Eurasian continent. It's not exactly facing China. So maybe, shutting down diplomatic relations with this historical unit near a time when it's going into a period of vestigiality anyway. I don't know. Mark.
Yeah, I got to disagree with you there.
Go for it,
NATO
please.
is used as a platform, principally by the U.S.-led Western global hegemony for the U.S. to exert military force over a large portion of the world. And we're not just talking Europe, we're talking, the entire Mediterranean basin, the Middle East. And this is exactly what Jens Stoltenberg pointed out to Trump when Trump was criticizing it. He said, you need us, politically and as a basing platform to project military force into the Middle East. And he's exactly right. And we've seen that repeatedly over the last decades. Far from it, NATO is morphing into a very effective platform for the U.S. to project military force in the pursuit of hegemony over a large portion of the world. I mean, that has very little to do with its ostensible defensive reason as a defense organization. That is true, but it has found new life and is not going anywhere. That's for sure. We just need to think to change the way we think about NATO.
Well, and maybe that's my mistake here, but I want to get into it just a little bit more because I want to push back again. Two things here. One, the AUKUS Pact, that's not NATO. That's another, parallel defense. And maybe they'll integrate that in a deeper way in some sense. But that's not NATO. That's something else. In other words, we're having to resort to another paradigm in order to solve the problem that we're facing. But
another geographic partnership, yes.
That's what I mean. Another thing here, Afghanistan. It wasn't that, in some sense, a big blow to the perception that the United States can hold NATO together, that all of our allies basically, granted, we're still paying for their military effectively with a lot of these subsidies and everything that's going on here. I mean, it's been going on. But still, Afghanistan was a shame. And looking at, isn't that pulling that structure apart? Isn't that so unimpressive that these other member partners of NATO might be like, yeah, I don't know if I want to be in a coalition led by this country?
Yeah, I actually, no, I don't see that happening. What I see happening is European countries responded very negatively to the U.S. pullout with the idea that the U.S. should have remained committed to the project. They think that the U.S. isn't being hegemon enough. And they they have made it very perfectly clear that they are willing to commit, to the U.S. Containment of China in whatever fashion in the Pacific. France has even reiterated that despite being shut out of the sub deal with Australia in favor of the U.S. and U.K. But there might be a different degree of geopolitical focus between, say, AUKUS and the Quad in the Pacific and NATO in Europe and the Middle East. But these two are, they're complementary geopolitical blocks, as it were. They're not competing, and one of them is not taking away from the utility of the others. Rather, they're complementary.
I'm curious. What is the practical result of this? Meaning, what does this look like in practical reality in regards to Russia suspending the diplomats or breaking diplomatic ties? What does it mean in real terms or real world terms?
Yeah, what does it mean is it just reiterates that Russia and the West are completely at military odds. Again, the big thing is over, Ukraine since 2014 when the democratically elected government was overthrown there in a West-backed putsch, and the continual drawing of Ukraine in as an de facto NATO basing platform, weaponized against Russia. That's essentially what's going on there. They suspended, actually, diplomatic relations back in 2014. Gradually, they reinstated them, but there wasn't really any constructive dialogue going on. And there are ever-increasing larger military drills on both sides on NATO's side and on Russia's side of Europe. And those are not getting any smaller, and they're not going away. And, even as the Asia is heating up, this divide in Europe is not going away either. Wow. In fact, it's just another front of the same struggle, I would argue.
How about the hypersonic missile we also wanted to talk about with you that yes. It said that China launched back in August, surprising intelligence officials around the world that made a round-the-world trip, basically, before apparently being able to hit its target. They've said that Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson has said that this is not how it's being talked about in the West, that this was a more or less routine test. What's your take on this, Mark?
Yeah, okay, so officially China is denying that it was a hypersonic missile. They are saying they're testing a reusable spacecraft. They have good reasons for not openly admitting to such a potential if what they have it. The story was broke by the Financial Times, and what they're describing it as a hypersonic glide vehicle that actually circumnavigated the entire world to then hit its target. And it didn't actually hit its target. It hit within a couple dozen miles. It was like 2 miles, like 2 dozen miles short of its target. But even in so doing, according to this report in the Financial Times, they demonstrated a military capability in this development far beyond what the U.S. thought they have. And if you'll remember, the U.S. itself has been testing hypersonic missiles back in April of this year, and they completely failed. And Russia has now successfully tested and is actually fielding several different hypersonic missiles and hypersonic glide vehicle as well. And the big thing about hypersonic weapons is that they have the speed of a ballistic missile, but they hug much closer to the surface of the Earth, right? They don't enter a parabolic arc up into the atmosphere, far up near space, and then back down, which means that they are much, much less vulnerable to existing ballistic missile defense. Missile
interception,
defense.
basically.
I find it very hard. Yes, yeah, they can't. It's almost impossible to take them down.
Yeah.
Right? They are maneuverable. They can smartly evade lower missile and air defense, and your standard missile defense against ballistic missiles is practically useless against them. And a hypersonic glide vehicle simply flies at a slightly higher speed than, say, a hypersonic cruise missile. And Russia has demonstrated both capabilities. China has now demonstrated it. And by all accounts, the U.S., which is in a hypersonic missile and technology arms race right now with both Russia and China, seems to be lagging a little bit behind, at least of what they've demonstrated so far.
You said China had a reason to deny this. What would their reason to deny it? I mean, from a standpoint of, indicating military capability, I mean, the U.S. has been basically trying to show this space weapon for God knows how long now to kind of intimidate the people around the globe and basically leave us to our devices. Why would China deny this? So why would China back away from this being kind of a show of skill and technical acumen?
Strategic ambiguity is still useful when something is still in the testing phase, and they are not, a fully completed and deployed weapon system. That's usually the point at which you want to announce it for deterrent capability. Until then, for political reasons, for military reasons, there's for at least the semblance of avoiding what is already an arms race, pretty much undeniably, there's still reasons for that.
I see. One thing, I wanted to get into the Russian Defense Ministry basically saying that a warship, you were saying that those weren't connected to the to Sergei Lavrov's comments. But it is somewhat of an issue in and of itself. I mean, freedom of navigation in Russian waters seems be a folly here. Yeah. And Russia's response to this was basically pretty significant in order to ward the ship off. What are your thoughts on this? A, what is the United States thinking? As that's its first point. And B, what is going on through Moscow's mind after something like this?
Okay, this freedom of navigation is the euphemism that the U.S. Uses for parading its military ships up and down Russia's, China's, and other countries' coastlines. Obviously, the only real threat to freedom of navigation and trade today is the U.S. and its allies and their continued piracy, state piracy against Iranian oil vessels, on the excuse of their unilaterally declared illegal economic sanctions on Iran and other countries, notwithstanding. They're the real threat. And when China flies ships and planes, near Taiwan, not violating its airspace.
Tepidly near Taiwan at that.
Off of China's own coast, right. That is provocative military coercion. But when the U.S. is parading its naval vessels and planes off of China's coast on the other side of the world, that is freedom of navigation. Just so you're clear on the distinction there. Right? But this is the second time back in 2020, the USS John McCain naval warship actually was confronting Russia, moving towards Russian territorial waters, challenging them in the Sea of Japan. The Sea of Japan has Japan, Russia, and the Koreas as littoral states. And in this particular instance, this is more interesting because Russia and China were involved in the area in joint naval drills, which have become a regular feature. So the U.S. was actually intruding on naval drills where the area had legally been closed down because they're conducting military drills. And they, you stay out when we're conducting artillery drills and everything else. That is a normal, a feature of the laws of the sea, as it were. And the U.S. evidently ignored this, or they say, well, at this exact time, we weren't, and we also don't accept your claims, your excessive maritime claims, as they say that. And after this ship was driven from its course, headed towards Russian territorial waters by a Russian ship, then the U.S. also flew a reconnaissance plane directly towards Russia's airspace in the exact same area. Again, a spy plane over these military drills. And that one had to be escorted off of its flight path as well. And this happened within 24 hours of the same incident. So we've had incidents in the South Sea of Japan provocative by the United States on both sea and in the air. At the time, Russia and China are conducting joint military drills. And I don't know exactly what the message there is, like, hey, you guys get closer together and continue to ally against us. If that was the idea, mission accomplished.
One thing that you said that just I feel like might make the point, you mentioned that there's a sort of, like, I don't know if it's tacit completely, but there's an understanding that if you're engaging in military drills, specifically naval drills, the other countries shouldn't try to get too close. Now, my first interpretation of that was, well, it's dangerous. You're doing artillery drills. That's dangerous. Another thing, of course, though, is revealing military intelligence. The United States, it sounds like they wanted to surveil what was going on so they could figure out how they're doing the drills, what technology they have, how they can use it. I'm guessing both of those are kind of wrapped into the implicit understanding that you don't venture in. What's the truth there, Mark?
Yeah, well, of course, the U.S. is not actually a signatory and does not abide by the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, that would be governing such things. That said, they often abide by some such strictures. U.S. is completely capable of spying on this military naval exercises without getting that close and being that provocative in the trajectory of their ship and airplanes. They were sending a political message as well as conducting espionage. There should be no doubt about that.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I guess the thing is, what's the political message? And for that matter, how's Moscow taking this? I mean, this is pretty provocative, to put it mildly. I mean, if we're complaining about
I
China...
would assume the message is something along the lines of, we don't like you conducting naval drills together, and here we are. Again, that's why I say that I'm not so sure that was such a useful message, or that the message will be interpreted and responded to in the way the U.S. hoped. But there's certainly no doubt that they reminded both Russia and China that they are there. Of course, Russia's and China naval drills are primarily directed against them. So, that's already taken for granted. But again, I don't think that the U.S. will get whatever result they were hoping for or was in their minds out of this.
How's Moscow thinking about this?
Considering that all of these events, and this is far from the first one, this is the second one in the Sea of Japan in 2 years. This has become an almost daily issue, particularly with spy planes in the Black Sea, in the Baltic Sea, U.S. doing trial bombing runs with nuclear-capable bombers of the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad on the Baltic Sea there. Russia sees these as increasingly alarming and provocative, and heading towards or certainly leaving open the potential for mistakes towards actual armed conflict between nuclear armed powers. They do not think this is a good thing. And again, they know again and again and again that this is near Russia's borders and near China's borders and Iran's and other countries, not near the U.S. borders. So it's perfectly clear who is being the aggressor and the provocateur in these situations.
Wow. Mark, it's very weird. It seems like we're getting mixed messages. On one hand, Biden wants to talk with Putin, and they have their summit. And at the end of that summit, it was this kind of hope that, okay, maybe these guys do have the potential to sit down, and even if they can't work anything out, just the very act of being able to bring down the hysteria seems to be something that's a positive attribute. I don't see that anymore. I mean, it's almost as if the meeting never took place. And if anything, it seems like these guys are basically teeing off for a potential strike. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong on this.
Yeah, I think if you'll remember our discussions about those talks at the time, that I was not very hopeful that they would accomplish much and were anything more than feeling out each other's positions on certain other issues. And we see that, immediately after this and after the U.S.'s meetings with China, the U.S. has not only not changed course, but actually escalated its military confrontations with both Russia and China under the guise of freedom of navigation. I mean, Biden administration in 8 months has driven U.S. warships through the Taiwan Straits off of China's coast 8 times.
Wow. Yeah.
It's consistent.
We're going to close it here. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
It was fun talking. Good talking with you as always. Mark Sloboda, international relations and security analyst. Follow him on Twitter at MarkSloboda1. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. When we come back, we'll be discussing Haiti with Jamima Pierre. Again, you're listening to Fault Lines. We'll be right back.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. We're going to have a conversation on Haiti. I mean, there's been a huge number of kidnappings that have taken place over the short time period, especially after Jovenel Moïse was assassinated. And just to read this story, recently, there were 17 missionaries, including 5 children, were kidnapped by a gang in Haiti. They were on their way home from a building an orphanage when they were jumped and taken. The mission's field director was not with the group at the time of the abduction and is working with the U.S. Embassy to get the group released. He stated, quote, "This is a special prayer alert, prayer that the gang members will come to repentance." And so I made the point, this is not an issue of prayer. This is more so an issue of economic devastation in regards to the country and this kind of collapse of social order. To have a conversation about what is taking place right now in Haiti, be it the kidnappings, be it the people who are basically deported there from the United States, even though they haven't been there in years, many of which being denied asylum. We're joined with Jemima Pierre. She's a Haiti Americas coordinator for the Black Alliance for Peace. Jemima, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Absolutely. So in reading this, the number of kidnappings in Haiti have basically exploded, especially after Jovenel Moïse was assassinated. What is basically taking place in Haiti, and why have the kidnappings expanded to such a degree? I mean, it wasn't just this. There was also a bus that was taken. There were basically people that were taken from church, where the minister itself was basically dragged out of the church. And the numbers have surged to a point where they're more than Sao Paulo, Bogota, and Mexico City, despite the fact that those countries are much larger than Port-au-Prince. What's going on in Haiti?
Well, what's important to understand is we cannot talk about the increase in kidnappings and violence without a long history, without recognizing what's happening in Haiti is the complete destruction of the Haitian state by the core group and the U.S. government, the ambassadors from Brazil, Canada, Spain, the United Nations. So that's the first thing. The core group just had its mandate renewed, or the UN occupation force, which has been running Haiti since 2004, has mandated renewed just this weekend. And so we have to understand, first of all, that Haiti is under occupation by the core group. They make all the decisions. They handpick the prime minister. But since the assassination of Jovenel Moïse, he's been turned into a martyr because Haitians see that there's nothing happening in terms of finding justice for this brazen assassination. And then we also have to ask how it is that this poor nation, everybody likes to say Haiti is the poorest country in the hemisphere, how is it that there's so many arms, where are all these guns coming from? Where's the ammunition coming from? Who's funding them? And how are they coming through the ports of Haiti when Haiti has actually been in an arms embargo since the 1990s? So we have to put all of this together for the context. And it's sad to me. I mean, I think the kidnappings are terrible, but Haitians have been killed and brutalized by gangs for years. And it's only when you have white missionaries that are caught, that are kidnapped, that it becomes a tragedy for the U.S. news media.
Agreed. Absolutely agree. So if you were trying to get the story across in a larger contextual way beyond just the kidnappings, what would it be? Or how would you explain it?
It would be complete takeover of the Haitian state, destruction of Haitian civil society by an occupation that's been ongoing since 2004. The people who make the decisions in Haiti are the core group and the U.S. State Department. They're the ones that handpick Ariel Henry, and it's also they work with the elite. And so the fact, for example, that you have gangs walking around and not being arrested, these gangs are becoming more powerful now than the Haitian government because it's an illegitimate Haitian government. Ariel Henry was imposed on the Haitian people by the U.S. government. When Biden sent his special representatives down there, it was supposed to, after the assassination, was supposed to handpick the successor. And they handpicked Henry, who was handpicked by Moïse. None of these people are elected. And so what we find is actually a split in the political party, the PHTK, which was also imposed on the Haitian people in 2010 after the earthquake by the U.S. government. So we cannot understand the rise in violence if we don't talk about the growing desperation among the people in Haiti because the state has been captured by a foreign government, by foreign groups who make all the decisions about who their leaders are, and then who flood the country with arms and ammunition. Barbecue actually stopped the prime minister from actually, commemorating our Jean-Jacques Dessalines, whose assassination occurred the anniversary of assassination occurred yesterday, and they were able to stop the prime minister from actually going there to lay down wreaths, because that's how much power these gangs have grown to have in the absence of a state that's been completely dismantled by foreign powers.
So the one thing that I want to come back to, and thank you again for joining us, Jemima. One thing that you said that kind of stuck out to me, the arms embargo, the improbability of getting these weapons into the country, it sounded like there was another element there, and maybe I missed something, but why do you think that's being allowed to happen? And that's the sort of suspicion, is that this stuff, maybe corruption, collusion between the U.S.-backed government and organized crime going on in the country, something like that. Why do you think that's happening?
Right. Nothing happens in Haiti without the U.S. knowing it and without the U.S. supporting whoever they want to support at the time that they need to. So we have to say, before, the elite class would actually bring in guns, because you have to know the ports are privately owned by the Haitian oligarchy. So whatever arms comes through the country, they come through the ports. So we have to know who the Haitian oligarchy is. And people say they've also been implicated in the murder of Jovenel Moïse. And so people will say that some of these people are actually backed by the government, which then supports these gangs, right? And the U.S. State Department knows these gangs. These gangs are walking around. They know who they are. So we know that some government members have given these young kids, because that's what they are, young kids carrying these big guns, giving them money, to go in and really terrorize the populations, especially populations who were protesting against this illegitimate government from the very beginning, from 2010 and then again 2015. The Martelly and Moïse governments were completely unpopular when they were imposed on the Haitian people. So yes, I think the international community is very much part of this. And they also want to make it seem like Haitians are inherently violent so that they can have an excuse to have more force and send an invasion force if they need to. And that's the thing that's really problematic for me as a Haitian American is, this really idea that these black people are so violent, they're killing each other, they're kidnapping people, and not really bringing the larger context of the purposeful destabilization of this country for years by foreigners. And to me, and that's a problem. The other thing I quickly wanted to say, I know I don't have much time, is this Christian charity. The other thing that's not reported is the Christian aid ministries, the Christian charity whose members have been kidnapped, are known for extreme sexual abuse of Haitian kids. And I don't know if you know this, but this, NBC News reported this back in 2019. We all know this. One of its ministers was convicted of like 40 counts of sexual abuse of young boys in Haiti back in Ohio after he fled Haiti when the Haitian police caught him. So we also have to know just the amount of violence and devastation on the Haitian people by both the local armed gangs, but also these foreigners coming into the country. That's deplorable. I remember the report came out, I believe it was UN workers were basically exchanging money for sex for some of the people that were there. Yes, the UN brought cholera to Haiti. The UN members impregnated all these young kids. The amount of violence that's not talked about, because that also is violence, the violence of occupation, the violence of the UN, the violence of these missionaries, the violence of the U.S. government, State Department, and the core group in really destroying this country. That also needs to be talked about, because this is the result of all this ongoing violence against the people. Well, let me ask you this. You made the point of saying that in order for the weapons to come in, that basically they had to be allowed through the ports. And that part of the reason was to delegitimize the government in and of itself, and for that matter, undermine any capability of the government to kind of come into fruition or anything like that. But wouldn't that on some level imply that the gangs are in support, I guess, of elements of the government? I mean, maybe I'm misunderstanding this. Yeah, so go ahead. Please. No. Take it. Well, no, a part of it is we have to know that the rise of these young men has been ongoing. Like it's gotten worse now, but for the longest time, people said, for example, Michel Martelly and Moïse had gangs, on their payroll to take down people who are in opposition. Now, I think these gangs were armed to take down opposition to this fake government that we've been imposed on. But since that's been imposed on the Haitian Haiti, on the Haitians in Haiti. But since the murder of Jovenel Moïse, there is a split in the party where a lot of people think that it was Martelly's part of the party that actually was behind the assassination. And some of the elites were also linked to this assassination. So now you have a split. In fact, just yesterday, the biggest gang leader, Barbecue, the G9 guy, had a whole ceremony for Jovenel Moïse commemorating his death, with hundreds and hundreds of people there to commemorate that. So he's become a martyr for some of these groups that were armed. And what's scary is what happens when we have all these armed young people who are now turning on the same people who provided them with the gun. This is where we're going to have a really big problem. And this is where the people that continue to suffer are the regular folks on the street.
So a couple of things here, but the one just most recently, well, I guess just generally, because this was sticking out to me in terms of the kinds of things you were saying. It seems to me you obviously know this stuff very well. You're a Haitian American. You've been covering this for basically your entire life. You've been aware of the situation here. But for Americans looking at this story, we were talking about it earlier. We know Haiti has a kidnapping problem, and that's coming back up. And it sounds like you're wanting to sort of foreign American audience say, this is a problem, yes, but don't just get stuck in this idea that, oh, Haitians are kidnapping American citizens and that's all. Because your government has been involved in this situation, inflaming the situation, making the situation worse. And not that it does anything to make this kidnapping better, but like you're saying, the organization that was, that was basically what these people were working for, the people who were kidnapped, they have some weird stuff in their history. So it sounded like you were saying, foreign American audience, there are other sides of the story that you should know, which I completely appreciate. But on these gangs, it sounds like, if you're right, and these are gangs that have been put up to basically doing anti-opposition suppression work on behalf of the government, on behalf of Moïse, Henry, just the different parts of the ruling class. And Moïse is now turning into a martyr. And Ariel Henry's government, Ariel Henry was thought to be personally involved in the assassination of Moïse. All of a sudden, these groups, who the government thinks are on their side maybe, are turning against them. That seems like a very precarious and dangerous situation on the ground locally, even for the elites themselves. Do you see, is there the room for like some massive upturn and a lot of violence among the oligarchy in Haiti right now? Because it sounds like they're sort of losing control of these forces. Jemima.
Yes, they are. And I think the U.S. is not helping by putting in Kenneth Merton, who was part of the actually original group of U.S. diplomats that installed this president, this party back in 2010. So the U.S. is actually fueling the fire. And they think Haitians are too stupid and to realize that they're being played with, but they're creating this really terrible, unmanageable situation that is going to rise up because people are angry that their president was assassinated, whether or not he was popular. The brazenness of this, and then the fact that they're playing around with this investigation, where the FBI came in and took all these files and never said anything. They're trying to control the narrative around who the murderer is, and so now the oligarchy, they are afraid. But then again, they're not the ones really being kidnapped. The truth is, it's the missionaries are easy targets, and so are the low, lower middle class, and so on. The oligarchy are in the hills, in behind their
fortified compounds, basically.
Exactly. Or they fly out to Florida and wait it out. That's the people I know are in Florida, have left Haiti. The people I know who are the wealthy have left Haiti, and they're going to wait it out. And so this is the problem, right? The problem is you have a complete destabilization by the U.S. government and the core group of this Haitian state. And the problem for me is that we always fall back, especially this country in the West, on this idea that these black people cannot govern themselves, and they're going to turn violent and they're going to kill one another because that's what they do. That's what they do inherently.
Jemima, about 30 seconds. If an honest actor legitimately wanted to help or assist Haiti, how would it take place?
It would take place to tell the U.S. government to stop meddling in Haitian affairs, stop fueling whatever it is that they're doing, stop sending the arms to the Haitian gangs, and tell your representatives to really stop messing with Haiti.
Stop. It's not even more help, because we look at it from the outside and we're like, okay, this country needs a lot of help. You're saying stop. What you're doing is not working. First, please stop. That makes perfect sense to me, and something to come back to in future conversations about this. Jemima Pierre, great talking with you this morning. Hope to have you back on to keep talking about this some other time. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, going into our hour break, coming back in a minute with headlines and the last hour of this morning show. Be right back.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it's time now for the last hour this morning of the most disruptive show, covering news, politics, and events from across these disunited states and the increasingly divided surface of our globe. In the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am your indefatigable, your ever vigilant, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together, that means you're surely listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, good morning, folks. It is October 18th. It's just past 9 a.m. Eastern. Hope you're having a good morning. Hope you're still having a good morning if you've been with us throughout the whole show. Let's get into headlines. First up in COVID news. Yesterday, in the United States, there were 22,152 new COVID cases reported, along with 1,528 new deaths. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 83,576 cases per day. That's a decrease of 22% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 57% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated. 66% of residents have received at least one dose of a COVID vaccine. And as of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 44,914,859 people across the United States. Meanwhile, here in the U.S., it has killed 724,499 people. In August, people aged 30 to 49 were 37 times more likely to die from COVID if they hadn't been vaccinated than if they had. Also, I believe we have a clip here, Jamarl, if I'm reading this right. We've got a clip from Biden, 66 million unvaccinated. Andre, I don't know if we have that clip primed up, but this is Biden from the last hour. 66 million unvaccinated, clearing red tape for kids. Let's play this clip.
We're down to 66 million, still an unacceptably high number of unvaccinated people from almost 100 million in July. That's important. It's important progress. But now's not the time to let up. We have a lot more to do. First, we have to do more to vaccinate the 66 million unvaccinated people in America. It's essential. The Labor Department is going to soon be issuing an emergency rule for companies with 100 or more employees to implement vaccination requirements among their workforce. Second, we're going to continue protecting the vaccinated. This week, the Food and Drug Administration and the FDA is reviewing data on Moderna and Johnson & Johnson boosters. We expect a final decision from the FDA and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, in the next couple of weeks. Third point I'd like to make, we need to continue to keep our schools and our students safe. Now, I know parents out there are anxiously waiting for a vaccine for children ages 5 to 11. The good news is the FDA and outside experts in the CDC are set to make its determination as to whether the vaccine will be authorized for that age range in the next few weeks. If authorized, we are ready. We have purchased enough vaccines for all children between the ages of 5 and 11 in the United States.
And that was Biden. And I'm going to continue with the headlines here. Russia's total, we're still on COVID news, Russia's total number of coronavirus infections has topped 8 million. That's more than 5% of Russia's population, as the daily infection toll hit another record yesterday. Colin Powell, military leader and the first black Secretary of State, has died at age 84 from COVID-19 complications. That's breaking this morning. He was fully vaccinated at the time he became ill. In national political news, ex-U.S. Air Force Captain Bob Solis claims that he saw a UFO while at a military base in Montana in 1967. He will be doing a live press briefing about this tomorrow. Although, Jamarl, real quick, do you know if this is going to be syndicated? Do you know if this is going to be broadcast online?
He is going to broadcast on live stream.
There you go. Yeah, so it will be.
It's going to be a live stream broadcast. Anybody can pretty much watch. Only media and press, political leaders are going to be there. So yeah, it should be a very interesting event.
Cool. Solis stated that the UFO hovered over a launch control capsule. Again, this is Montana, 1967. Hovered over a launch control capsule, shot a beam of light down and disabled 10 intercontinental ballistic missiles. Solis clearly sees this as a message from extraterrestrials about Earth's nuclear habits and capabilities. In national news, last year after the George Floyd protests began, Professor Gordon Klein of UCLA received an email from a white student asking the professor to grade her black classmates more leniently. She reasoned this by saying that, quote, the unjust killings of black Americans by law enforcement and other whites, along with the effect the COVID-19 pandemic was having on the black community, may be causing them stress that might affect their classwork, end quote. When he refused this, the school placed a teacher on a suspension. Klein is now suing UCLA for defamation, labor law violations, breach of contract, violation of privacy, and interference with his consulting business. Also generally ridiculous behavior. Although, again, like we said earlier on, there was something, and I want to get it up to actually talk about, because we should probably talk about this at some point. This is part of, like, in a dedicated segment, I mean. Be a good idea. Part of the whole cancel culture, woke movement thing in academia, and that, I would argue that started in full force back in 2016, something like that, 2016, 2017. Remember Berkeley, Antifa, and all these fights over safe spaces that have kind of fallen out of favor. They've just become part of the cultural background, that we're dealing with right now. But that's pretty recent.
There was a lot of protests with some of the speakers that they were bringing to these colleges. I definitely remember that.
It was the whole rise of the alt-right thing in 2016, 2017. No, I remember that too. My point is, this is a continuation of that. This is part of the legal fallout. Granted, a lot more recent, but like, good topic to talk about. Anyway, we were talking about this earlier. In his response email to this student, Gordon Klein had said some stuff that was a little bit like cringy, sort of, about how white couldn't you say the same thing about white students during these George Floyd times? Because everybody thinks they're racist, therefore they're psychologically having a hard time with it. Couldn't you say that white students should get work off? That's, again, if you say that back to the student, I get where the student's going to be like, this guy's a racist. And then they send that to the school, and then the school decides to get rid of him.
That's not enough to get rid of him.
But that's not enough to get rid of him.
Especially if there were no underlying complaints or issues that the guy has ever showed or displayed, and he just gives a response in repudiation to your response, that shouldn't be enough to take the guy out.
Also, I kind of expect college professors to be a little bit cringy.
Yeah.
I expect all older people to be a little bit cringy. I don't really care all that much. I expect myself to be a little bit cringy because I'm getting older now too. I expect I'm probably going to embarrass.
By the age of 28 or 29.
29, exactly. Well, I'll tell you, man, growing up in these days, it's like if you're not in your early 20s, you're off your prime. You're out of touch.
Right.
You don't know what's going on. Austin gives a salute. But anyway, we've got other news here. Let's get into it. International news, breaking from RT this morning. Moscow announced that it will completely suspend the operations of its mission to NATO. This comes 2 weeks after the U.S.-led bloc expelled 8 Russian diplomats for alleged undisclosed espionage at the headquarters in Brussels. The NATO Information Bureau in Moscow will also be forced to shut down as part of retaliatory measures. On Saturday, a group of 17 U.S. missionaries, including 5 children, were kidnapped by a gang in Haiti. They were on their way home from building an orphanage when they were jumped and taken. The mission's field director was not with the group at the time of the abduction and is working with the U.S. Embassy to get the rest of the group released. He stated, quote, "This is a special prayer alert. Pray that the gang members would come to repentance," end quote. In a UN court, Azerbaijan's deputy foreign minister has accused Armenia of, quote-unquote, ethnic cleansing and laying landmines since the end of the ceasefire late last year. Elnur Mammadov said that the landmines have killed 106 Azerbaijanis, including 65 civilians, since the conflict was ended by a Russian-brokered deal last year. Financial Times reported that China's launch in August of a hypersonic nuclear-capable rocket surprised many in Western intelligence. However, China has denied that it tested a nuclear-capable hypersonic missile, with its foreign ministry spokesman saying a routine test had been carried out to test different types of reusable spacecraft technology. He said the Financial Times reporting was flawed. We were speaking about this with Mark Sloboda earlier on, and he was basically saying they have to deny this kind of thing. But basically, his assumption was something like this has fundamentally happened. It's true. It's not like this is being massively misreported. China does have these hypersonic glide craft, these missiles that they can send or whatever, aircraft that they can use to launch payloads. Apparently, he said,
whether the missiles or craft seems to be the distinction that they're, your definition of is stuff.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, exactly. That's true. That's fair. Apparently it missed. It missed by a couple dozen miles, which is...
But again, if it went around the world...
It went around the whole world, and that's the real big part.
That's not a massive... That's a tweak in coding or something like that.
The fatal stabbing of Conservative Member of Parliament Sir David Amos on Friday is now being declared a quote-unquote terrorist incident. I kind of wondered if it would or not. A 25-year-old man has been arrested at the scene and is currently being detained under the Terrorism Act. Thanks for adding that, Austin. In tech news, on the topic of media hysteria and fake news, you may be hearing this story about Apple collaborating to create a car, hold your horses, We'll get into it. It's not exactly what it is. From Bloomberg.com, Apple's iPhone partner, I'm quoting here, it's the title of an article. Apple's iPhone partner Foxconn unveils its first electric vehicles, quote unquote. From Tech Explorer, Apple supplier Foxconn unveils electric vehicles, quote unquote. In other words, they're associating Apple and Foxconn. That's kind of natural. A lot of people do. But this is not an Apple car. In reality, Foxconn does manufacture iPhones and other iPhone products, but this deal won't be with Apple. These aren't even entirely Foxconn's own cars. They're working with other car brands to create the electric vehicles from their templates, far from the iCar that seems to be implied by headlines. Doing our diligence, just trying to correct potential misinfo there or whatever in the media. In business news, new data leaks project that Netflix's Squid Game will generate almost $1 billion in revenue, $891 million in revenue. Considering the show has a production cost of $21.4 million, Netflix hit big with this series. The only question now, and I will turn it back to you, Jamarl. You might actually have, I think you did answer this. You said you could survive this, right?
I think so.
You think you could survive Squid Game?
Pretty confident, yeah.
All right, let's hope we never have to test this one out. I'm not even gonna. That's just rank self-confidence right there. I'm not gonna dignify that with a response, Jamarl. No, I'm just kidding. Facebook, in more tech news or in more business news, Facebook announced that it has plans to hire 10,000 workers in the European Union over the next 5 years to help build the metaverse, quote unquote. That's a futuristic notion for connecting online users using augmented and virtual reality. Facebook has been touting the creation of the metaverse as the next big thing after the mobile internet. Oh, God, Austin, this one strikes my core. The National Holiday Day. Wait, what? In our holiday news, what was I even saying there? In our holiday news, today is National No Beard Day, which for I have a not insignificant beard right now, and I feel like this one is just somebody trying to tear me down. Right. This is psychological torture. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Those were our headlines. No, I'm kidding.
Beard Day. What a day.
No Beard Day. What the hell are you doing to me? Where's Beard Day? I mean, I'm sure there is a Beard Day.
I proposed to my wife at Station 2. I had a flash mob dance thing, right? She's, we're there. She doesn't see the family members. She doesn't see the members at work. All of them are kind of behind this thing. And it just so happened you had the Bearded League of Virginia that was also there on that day. And so when Bruno Mars came on, I think I want to marry you, everybody starts dancing and whatnot. These guys also got involved and were also doing their thing, dancing during the flash mob.
There we go.
National Beard.
Apparently, the first Saturday of September is Global Beard Day. I missed that one.
Global Beard Day.
Yeah, it's Global Beard Day.
There's also the Ahmaud Arbery trial that is starting today. Basically, a black jogger who was caught by 3 good old boys, chased down with a pickup truck, and basically murdered on the scene, saying that we thought that there was a robbery in the area, and we were doing a citizen's arrest on this guy who was basically murdered, and who one of the other members got off the truck and Snapchatted the murder itself. All of this stuff was just weird.
Do you know that case is actually why we're the hosts of this show in its own weird way?
What do you mean?
Because the previous host of the show, Lee and Garland, went at, they just got into huge building debates about Ahmaud Arbery, about this specific case, leading up to George Floyd, and then George Floyd hit, and trust me, there was a lot of ammunition at that point for the all-out war that came in. But yeah, this was a big deal, and that was why they were at each other's throats for a while, and that's why we're hosts of the show, basically.
I got to be honest. Look, as an American citizen, do you have the right to jog in your country without the cops stopping you every 10 minutes, asking you for ID? Or for that matter, random people stopping you in order to try to do whatever they want to you?
Yeah.
I think the answer should be no. I don't like the stop and frisk stuff in New York where they would just randomly stop people as they're walking by. Let me see your ID.
We have our guest on the line. But also, there are two sides on this one, legitimately. Apparently, there had been robberies in the neighborhood.
There were.
And this home, he ran up to it and was, looking around this home that was in the middle of construction. So he's a little bit suspicious. He's just a jogger checking out a home. But I do that kind of thing. I've done that kind of thing before where I'm just, walking around the neighborhood.
That's something to call the cops on, though. That's not something where you get in a pickup truck, run the guy down, and
maybe
basically murder the guy.
And maybe he shouldn't. But then what happens, of course, is they run the dude down the street in a pickup truck. They sort of cut him off, and then they end up shooting him. And that seems pretty darn unjustified, if anything is.
Yes.
So,
absolutely.
Anyway, we have our guest on the line, though. Manila Chan on the line. I know she's strapped for time with a bunch of breaking news this morning, so I want to get to her as soon as possible. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back with RT host of In Question, Manila Chan. Back with her on the other side of this short break. Be right back.
lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime.
I like beer. Yeah, we drank beer.
Whoever's in charge, and I want them recorded.
Let's talk about that.
Discussing all the controversies and news across the disunited states of America. Tune in to Fault Lines every weekday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern, only on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. I'm going to bring in a guest, Manila Chan, because we have a short amount of time that are based on things that have just taken place along with Colin Powell. So Manila Chan is veteran news anchor and host of RT America's daily news program, In Question, actually one of my favorite shows on RT. Manila, thank you for joining us. How are you doing today?
Hey, guys. Good to be with you. I'm sorry I have to cut it short today with the breaking news of Colin Powell's passing.
No, it totally understood. I mean, it's a big deal. Colin Powell has been a political fixture for the entirety of my life, or at least as I've been aware of politics going back to being a kid. And he has been a major figure in American politics, and even to the point of, being considered for presidential material. He was like one of the most trusted men in America up until the Iraq War thing. What are your thoughts about this? I mean, whether it's, I guess, the significance of his life, whether it's, I don't know, I guess, and I'll just leave it as somewhat of an open question. What are your thoughts on his passing?
I think he is a symbol of a bygone era of figures that worked in government that were supposed to be in apolitical roles, especially, when he was like the Joint Chiefs, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He was at one point the Secretary of State, and even then, I think the controversy that mired him around the Iraq War obviously kind of followed him for a little bit, but I think overall, Americans in general really, really liked Colin Powell. He seemed to be kind of a straight shooter and just kind of didn't. I don't think seemed.
He felt above it all, in a weird way. I mean, even in the Bush administration, he was the one who was most trusted. Bush,
yes.
Their trust rating was like in 30s or whatever. Especially his vice president. It'll come to me in a moment, Darth Vader. But
Dick Cheney.
Dick Cheney. Thank you. But Colin Powell didn't seem. I mean, part of the reason they even trotted him out there to give the propaganda for the 9/11. I mean, for the nuclear weapons thing, was entirely because of the way he engaged with America and the way America saw him. And so, yeah, I agree with you. He seemed above it all. What do you think this is going to have going forward in regards to any significance associated with his passing?
I would say that if it wasn't for Colin Powell, Barack Obama probably would have never been president. I think Colin Powell could have potentially been the first black president, but because I don't think he was kind of dirty enough to get trotted out there to that level, he didn't want to play. But I do think because he was a person of color, and it was the first time that I think Americans actually even entertained the idea of having a non-white man in such a high-profile role, I think that led the way for Barack Obama. And we should also note that even though he was originally a Republican, he did switch parties to independent in his later years. But I do think he was significant in the way that we viewed people of color in these high-profile positions in office, and what we're seeing in the 2000s came because of Colin Powell.
Very interesting. Basically, it's almost like Obamacare leading the way to Medicare for all. It's like, okay, this national health system that's created, even though it's flawed, even though it's messed up, it at the very least gives the American public this kind of mindset of, hey, why can't we have universal health care, which basically increases the potential for something like a Medicare for All plan? You're saying that basically Colin Powell was this kind of pretext, or this primary thing that allowed the public to give this notion of a black president, giving Obama a heavier chance than if Colin Powell wasn't there and those comments about him being potential president never happened. That's a fair point.
Powell and Condoleezza Rice, and then before you knew it, Barack Obama.
Obama. Let me ask you this. So speaking about presidents, I'm going to go into Biden for a moment and the comments that Biden were making. Biden is doing this weird thing where I think it's not working for him, especially for the American audience. He's framing everything that takes place in America, even his bill that he wants to get accomplished for the Build Back Better bill, as a contest of nations. And he gets into this very weird speech recently. He's made this thing about autocracy democracies and everything else, but he has this speech where he's basically screaming and shouting that there are fewer democracies. And he's like banging his fist on the desk and everything. It's a very weird speech. And it's like, dude, your polling numbers are falling through the roof. You're losing blacks. You're losing independents. You're losing Hispanics. And it's not because there are fewer democracies. Let's play the clip, guys.
Oh, yeah.
Where do you see this moving, though? I mean, again, it comes down right now to Sinema and Manchin.
No, not this one. It's the Biden clip, the one where he is basically saying
we have fewer democracies in the world today than we did 15 years ago. Fewer. Not more. Fewer. Cannot be sustained. That's why from day one of my administration, I've taken concrete steps to put human rights back at the center of our foreign policy and reassert our moral leadership on the global stage. To lead, as Chris has so often heard me say, with the power of our example, not the example of our power. Chris and I served in the Foreign Relations Committee. We excoriated the abuses elsewhere in the world and called for action overseas. But human rights, in some ways, stood apart from the domestic struggle of civil rights.
Let's cut this for a bit. Let's stop right here. Manila, that sounds so unhinged to me. The first time I heard that speech, I was like, why is he so angry about that? First and foremost. And within the context of him banging his fists, shouting fewer democracies and everything else, I get what he's trying to say. And even previously, a lot of his argument boiled down to we need to invest in our own country in order to be able to compete with China and the other countries. And it's a war between autocracy and democracy. And we need to show that democracies can still work, et cetera. But I think what he misses is whether you showing that democracies can work doesn't really have anything to do with foreign countries. It has everything to do with your investment and your support of your own country. He seems to be missing the point. How did you view the speech? I mean, or at the very least, segment of the speech.
Oh, Jamarl, I'm totally with you on that one. I don't know. I mean, let's face it. People have to know, right, that all U.S. presidents have like a media coach and somebody that kind of, tells them how to act before they take the podium. Somebody behind the closed doors told Joe Biden, you got to get passionate. You got to start talking about these other countries. But they totally missed that point, like you said, because American voters, the people specifically who voted for him, his core base, blacks, Hispanics, just minority groups, his numbers have tanked within those demographics by double digits because they're not really caring right now about what's happening in Brazil and the populist movement behind Jair Bolsonaro. Nobody cares about that here in America. They're caring about inflation rates. The ports are all backed up. That Christmas may not be the Christmas that they were hoping for in a post-COVID world. That's what Americans care about. And for him to start pounding his fist and getting angry and passionate about, democracy across this world is we're losing ground, and Americans don't care about that. And it seems to show me, at least, that the people he has hired, whether it's some third-party PR group that's coaching him on what to say and how to present it, they are way off base. I'm not sure where they are getting their numbers to support this kind of speech, where they're getting that from. But the numbers I'm looking at are would tell me that he needs to be on point more about what's happening here, especially because Build Back Better is at this logjam that's going to be, before you know it, it's Halloween.
Yes. Yeah.
When they're supposed to take a vote. You've got 2 weeks to plead your case, make amends with somebody as far left as Bernie Sanders, and this is all within his party, mind you, and on the opposite spectrum of the Democrat Party, Joe Manchin, and closer to Joe Manchin, Kristen Sinema. He's not making that point. So I think it was a little unhinged, kind of all over the place. It's like, Joe, you're not running for office. You're still in your first year, not running for re-election. Talk about Build Back Better, because Americans care about keeping food on the table, that they can afford milk that's less than $5 a gallon and gas that's under $5 a gallon. That
would be good. It sounds to me, and I think that you're absolutely spot on, and that's a really good point. It sounds like they're taking your word for it for a minute, and I just agree with it. It makes perfect sense. He has coaches. They're trying to get him to say certain things. It sounds like instead of responding to something that they perceive in the public, they're trying to program something into the public, which is with this focus on the rise in authoritarianism, this sort of new, Cold War thing we have going with democracy versus authoritarianism, where authoritarianism is most conveniently represented by Russia and China. It just sounds like it sounds like rabble-rousing. It sounds like militaristic rabble-rousing in a sort of sedated way, in a characteristically Biden-esque sedate way. I wanted to sort of pivot here. We only have so much time. You're talking about inflation. You're talking about the absolute collapse of progress on this bill. We were talking about this earlier this morning with Bernie Sanders going into West Virginia with this op-ed to West Virginians against Manchin, basically, and Manchin has responded rather strongly to that. But that's I'm sort of bringing that in as the timely element. That is the state of the conversation over this bill. It's Bernie Sanders going into West Virginia, putting out an attack ad against the guy who's holding this bill up, admittedly, against Manchin. A lot of people said that was what needed to be done, is to try to hit Manchin where he lives. So I know some people are excited about this. But as a whole, it's all just a failure because nothing is happening with the bill. At least that's my take. Manila, looking at what's going on, what do you see?
It is a failure because Joe Manchin did punch back. I mean, did we expect him not to? Joe Manchin punched back and said, we have outside people from outside of our state trying to influence our state. And as much as Bernie Sanders has so much pull in so many parts of the country, I think he missed his mark too. Because if you look at pollings for the 2 times that he's run for president, he did horribly in West Virginia. There was no chance he was ever going to take that state. So based on that, it's like, why are you even bothering to try to write this an op-ed, mind you? It's not a TV commercial. It's not a clickable link on TikTok or something. Put out a TikTok if you're trying to influence the young people that are moving into West Virginia. But to write an op-ed blasting Joe Manchin to try to achieve the $3.5 trillion under the Biden Build Back Better plan is not going to work. He did not do well in West Virginia. It just seems like a lot of people in the Democrat Party right now are misunderstanding how to read these polls. And as much as I can agree with a lot of the things that are in the Build Back Better plan, that's not the way to achieve it, especially not having Bernie Sanders trotted out there, where people in West Virginia would never get behind what he has to say anyway. So they picked the wrong pony to race in West Virginia.
Manila, thank you. We're going to let you go. I know you have to get back to the show. The voice that you guys were listening to is Manila Chan. She's veteran news anchor and host of RT America's daily news program, In Question. You can follow her on Twitter at Manila Chan or Facebook at Manila Chan Reports, and watch her show In Question on RT America. Like I said, it was my gateway show to other parts of even including Rick Sanchez. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C., and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri, daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And heads up, we're taking your calls for the next little while now. 202-521-1320 from now until the end of the show. Basically, we're talking. And we haven't taken your calls yet this week or this morning. So if you're around, please do call in. 202-521-1320 is, again, the phone number, 202-521-1320. Jamarl, you're saying that Colin Powell had previously been diagnosed with multiple myeloma, like a kind of blood cancer that makes you more susceptible to infection, which is interesting and makes sense. And also, I saw people who, Colin goes in, he's been fully vaccinated, but he dies from COVID-19 complications. I see people who are going in and being like, using this as the time to be like, well, the COVID vaccines sure don't work, do they? Apparently, he has other stuff that's going to make it worse, too.
The myeloma apparently was screwing with his ability to deal with infections. And so, despite having the vaccine, well, you had the vaccine, but you also have other issues associated with, illness and everything else, especially if you've it would be no different than if you were taking immunosuppressants and you got vaccinated. Well, you're still taking immunosuppressants, and anytime your body is going to encounter the disease with the virus, you're going to have a much harder time dealing with it than somebody with a typical immune system. He had basic comorbidities that went along with it. Using this as a platform to attack the vaccine, I'm sorry, it's just pathetic. The man had all sorts of issues. And at this point, the reporting, that we've seen, the people who didn't get vaccinated had like a 37-time more likely to die from COVID as opposed to people who were vaccinated.
And that's from a CDC study.
Yeah, CDC study. So it wasn't like, from nowhere. And even the other study had 11 times more likely to die. And so, look, the vaccine works. It's not necessarily bulletproof. It's not necessarily going to stop each and every individual from catching COVID. But on odds, it does lower the opportunity or the chance for the person to die. And it even weakens it when the person gets it. This is unfortunate for Colin and his family. It's weird. I have a hard time relating to this in a particular way, because in one part, I distinctly remember the Iraq War, and I distinctly remember the speech that Colin Powell gave, talking about weapons of mass destruction and everything else, basically leveraging his likability and his reasonableness and his being above politics and his honesty in order to say something that was radically dishonest and get 1 million people killed in the process, not to mention the other wars that were spurred from it. By the same token, what was he after that? And, is there such thing as redemption for the individual to kind of change and everything else, despite the things that the individual did at a particular point in time? I don't know. All that stuff falls into this notion of what does it mean for a person in a totality of a life? And does one event define that particular individual for the rest of their life? And if that's the only event then I guess the answer is yes, just by definition. But with Colin Powell, he had been around for so long. And like Manila Chan made the point, he did come across as above it all. Like, there was this thing of, is Colin Powell going to run for president? He'd be the first black president, et cetera, et cetera. And you had this thing, white America accepts him because of his military history. All of that stuff was being said about Colin Powell at a certain point. But the Iraq War thing was just devastating from the standpoint of credibility and devastating from the standpoint of consequences. So, I don't know.
For America, but for some reason, not so much for him, maybe. Maybe because the perception is that he was duped into it. And maybe he actually was.
That's why we need Scott, because Scott would know. Scott was in the situation where he was actually there. He was in those communications and talks about weapons of mass destruction and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And Scott basically made the point that the UN or the weapons of mass destruction thing was being used to create a war, not to stop a war.
Yes.
And that his inspections and everything else was basically trying to help these guys to not provoke the U.S. into consequences that the U.S. was absolutely at that point trying to provoke.
The U.S. wanted a war. By the way, we get a bunch of callers, and I want to make sure we get to them. And plus, we've been getting new callers recently, too. These are all the people we have on the line are like either routine or regular callers. Not that I appreciate you all. I'm just saying. I'm saying I want to make sure if anybody who's new's calling in, I want to make sure we have time to get to them, too, so I don't want to get too deep into our own conversation. We've got time for it. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. Let's go to Tarif, calling in from New Orleans. Tarif, you're talking about a bunch of stuff I hear. What's on your mind?
Thanks for taking my call. First, I'd like to say hashtag free drone signs, free Down Zinger, and hands off Haiti. First comment is dealing with Craig Murray, for what I understand. The prison where he's at, they're supposed to have a COVID-19 outbreak there. That's my first comment. The guys that's good and talk about China and also U.S. geopolitical, they got 3 people I'm going to give you the names. Eric Lai, Ekner Tagin. Ekner Tagin appears on CCTV and RT as well. He's from like Wisconsin. Harley Sliner. And the Julian Assange thing. I hope another story come out to help out with his case. And my last comment is dealing with the container ships. There's rumors circulating that all those container ships on the West Coast that's being backed up might be doing it purposely to back them up to cause a economic structure on China because, those manufacturing companies still got to pay their employees. They got to wait for the invoices to be processed and all that so they can get their money. So we could have like an undeclared trade war going on.
That's so weird.
Tarif, those are
American consumers.
Yeah, that's hitting the States pretty badly.
We'd be buying those products too. So it's like,
you're talking about like inflation. You're talking about the amount of prices. You're talking about people not having access to various supplies and stuff. That's not just hitting China. That's also adversely affecting us.
Yes, it is. Yeah, but it's affecting China dealing with their manufacturers. Where if they can't unload the product that they produce, then that affects their economy too. And
it affects our economy too. That's the thing. It's a double-edged sword. And my feeling, and you know exactly how much worth that's worth or whatever. But I feel like that would hurt us more than it would hurt them. We can't buy those products. For going into Christmas, we didn't really get into it with Manila, but like the prices for gifts are going to be crazy high this winter because of inflation on the one hand, and then the supply chain thing and these ships that you're talking about on the other. Americans would pay that price too, but you've already addressed that. Tarif, what's your take on it?
Yes, where's our manufacturing? We don't really have nothing here. We should start working more with China and Russia and the rest of the world. Leave Haiti alone. I'm glad you had Jimmy Korea on again. But, we got to start investing in our own selves, so we won't have to worry about supply chain as much. Now we're dealing with a geopolitical, low-scale intensity war going on. So we don't know what else is going to come because they say it's going to go on for the next month. So what, this is going to get worse? The price of meat going to go up again?
Well, Tarif, that was a choice that American businesses made for themselves, though. They made the choice to have this kind of just-in-time production where, okay, we're not going to hold on to inventory. We're just going to get the items globally when they come out almost immediately. And look, if everything is running as smooth without any hiccups going forward, then, okay, maybe that works. But the moment there's a hiccup, like COVID or like an earthquake or some kind of, assault, I think it was the ship stuck in the what is it called? The Suez Canal, right? And then at that point, things fall apart because, there was never any plans on having larger stocks of inventory and everything else.
In other words, that's incompetence. What you're describing there, Jamarl, is incompetence. Tarif, it sounds like you're describing this as an intentional move. And my take on this is the whole is this somebody with malintent who's doing this intentionally, or is it just somebody who doesn't know what they're doing? In the times that we're living in, when things are less controlled, it seems to me, than they ever have been. It's not that there's like a new world order. It's that you have all these different actors that are reeling out of control after decade after decade after decade of relative stability where the United States was pretty much in control. Everybody's competing with each other. And I think the sense is right now, people are overwilling to ascribe agency to something when it could just be incompetence. It could just be we can't process it because people don't want to work at the ports because they're worried about catching COVID or they're kept from their jobs or whatever, which was kind of what I remember this problem being in the first place, where we couldn't import stuff. And again, 42%. China accounts for about 42% of U.S. imports, which interestingly enough, that rose after the Trump trade war started back in 2019. The imports from China actually went up. Have gone up since then. But so much of it's coming from them. I don't know, Tarif, we've got other callers on, but any last thoughts here?
No, I appreciate it. Y'all go ahead and take the other callers. Thank you. I'll call y'all back tomorrow with something else.
Hey, Tarif, thank you as always for calling in. And I'm sad to hear about the Craig Murray COVID potentially being in the prison there. That's not good news. If that's true. Let's go to Michael calling in from Sydney, talking U.S. propaganda on China. Michael, you're on. What's going on?
Look, I actually I was actually just lucky enough this evening to have a meal with a couple of friends of mine from Xinjiang. Two young ladies and their brothers, and a couple of other of my friends. and they cooked us some really lovely food. And we were talking about the Xinjiang issue, and they basically said that the people who, for lack of a better word, the Americans say, re-education camps, trying what they call vocational education camps or vocational education training schools, so kind of like boarding school. And they actually basically said that they're happy with what the Communist Party has done in Xinjiang. They're happy these people are off the streets causing problems, especially the hardcore ones who are going around. I mean, they grew up in Xinjiang. They know about the violence, and it was there. They know about the terrorist attacks. So they had more terrorist attacks than any part of the world for Afghanistan and stuff like that. And they are terrorists, and the people in Xinjiang are very happy that they're now living in an area of China that has every household has running water. Right, you're actually trying to put in the most expensive water system to a very remote village in Xinjiang. They piped it over 25 kilometres just for this one village. And they do all this engineering fix to get this fresh water to them, so they didn't have to go to the river because the river downstream wasn't clean for drinking. They had to go right upstream and build a pipeline down to a village. They only had like 500 or 600 people. And it's the most expensive fresh water system for any group of people on Earth. Okay, and they're saying they're committing genocide in Xinjiang. They're not. Okay, these ladies have told me. People say, "Oh, you never speak anyone from Xinjiang." They're from Xinjiang. They're Muslim. Okay, and also if you look at what's going on in Europe at the moment, and with the South China Sea and the Russian frigate and all this sort of stuff. That was in the Sea of Japan and the St. Peter the Great Gulf, Gulf of St. Peter. Basically, that was trying to supply on the Chinese and Russian naval exercises. Also, you got this issue about the gas that Europe's trying to weaponize. Now, anyone with half a brain can work out there was all this controversy over Nord Stream 2. So there's now 2 pipelines going to Germany from Russia. There's one going through Ukraine and Poland and one going through Nord Stream. All they have to do is agree and make that pipeline commissionable, and Putin said he'll supply the gas in an instant. They've been pressurized. It's all ready to go. All you do is pass the approval to put that into operation. He'll keep the pipeline operating through Ukraine and Poland. They'll still get their transit fees and everything, and he can double supply gas to Europe tomorrow, which will bring down the price. And he said he'll negotiate a sweetheart deal for him. What part of this don't the American people understand? What part of this don't Westerners understand? As the European governments that are forcing up the price of gas by not making Nord Stream 2 available to pump gas into Europe. Right? It's the German people are going to be cold this winter. It's the French people are going to be cold this winter. Macron said he's going to turn off the spigot going across the canal to England for their next. They've got enough in France. His system's warm. And England said, you can't do that. And Macron said, for lack of a better word, up yours, we can, because you're no longer part of Europe.
Well, that's because of the fishing boats issue, where Macron in France was basically saying that the UK wasn't allowing the fishing license, and because they weren't allowing the fishing license, their retaliation was going to be to basically cut their gas off, which Europe, of course, got hysterical. I mean, the UK got hysterical over. But look, it's a good point, right? I mean, Russia has been basically supplying gas, in this case to China, but also, you're right, to Europe. And when you think about it, these guys are having shortages. They're already paying exorbitant amounts of money for heating. And I'm saying this as somebody who's been in the Czech Republic and in Germany when it was freezing cold, and the amount of money needed to pay for gas was obscene. In fact, I remember turning the heat up, and once I left, the woman was very upset with us because we decided to cut the heat up in the Czech Republic, and they had a bill of like $400 for less than a month of heating. Like, it's hard to get across, especially to the American audience, how much or how expensive electricity is, like for warming and heating and everything else, especially in the colder months. And so the idea that, they're getting Nord Stream 2, and they would actually listen to the United States to hold that process up and to basically try to attack that process while they're in desperate need of it is appalling and embarrassing. Talk about a vassal state. That's not even a decent vassal state. I mean, so yeah, I totally agree with you on that part. Yeah, I don't. Shane, what are your thoughts? I mean, I roundly agree.
I'm going to actually, I'll come to you with the question from our producer, which is he wanted me to ask you, Michael, about the $5,000 fine for not being vaccinated in parts of Australia. I believe specifically, and it's in the Western Territories, right? Or pardon me, not Western, Northern Territories, right, Michael?
No, we do have fines here. We don't have a fine here for not being vaccinated. We have fines here for not wearing masks or breaking COVID regulations. There are fines that apply to businesses and individuals. Depending on the regulation in which state, it's a bit like America. Each state makes their own regulations. Although federally they do different things federally. Federal controls some of the health system, state controls some of it.
But here's the thing, Michael. I'm saying from late last week, a lot of stuff about this move to fine the unvaccinated for $5,000, specifically workers, if they won't get the jab, and that's again in Northern Territory.
No. Basically they'll be laid off.
That's yeah. So they wouldn't be fined; they'd be laid off. It's simply that's what it says. Even though there is technically this rule. Something like that.
I think that I haven't heard of any rule on the news. I watch ABC in the morning. I watch a lot of ABC News Breakfast in the morning. I haven't heard of any $5,000 fines being issued for refusing to get vaccinated.
Interesting.
Same situation as America.
Look into it, because maybe it's being reported wrong. I'm seeing it in a bunch of different places. I'll start with the Daily Mail, which is maybe a bit tabloidy, but also often right about things, and they're reporting this directly. Referencing, I believe, a local newspaper. But we should come back to it at some point.
So I see this from The Guardian, and it says, NSW warns businesses against letting in unvaccinated people as Victoria overhauls COVID contracting. And this is where they're saying something about fines. I think it says $5,000 to $11,000 fine.
Businesses.
Businesses. Yeah, right here. Businesses, there are fines from $5,000 all the way up to $11,000 and closure for a period of time if businesses flagrantly disregard the COVID safety plans.
I'm saying for individual workers here.
And it might mean not even displaying a QR code or not having done the basics, he said. Well, I mean, that's rather extreme.
If it's true that it's individuals who are getting fined $5,000 for showing up to work unvaccinated and not businesses, and that you haven't heard about that, Michael, that's kind of weird. But maybe something about this isn't as it's being said.
Yeah. I mean, the businesses thing I kind of get. I mean, basically, if you are allowing people to come into your business not wearing a mask, or even your employees are not wearing a mask, and you get caught on that, well, in their heads, you're creating a super spreader event potentially that could go out and adversely affect other people. The individual fining is extreme, though. That would be massively extreme.
So you would be against that?
Yes. I mean, I could see if you're firing somebody or saying, okay, you can't come into work. I mean, we have mandates here ourselves. But, we're going to either you put something in your body or we're going to charge you $5,000 for it. Seems way overboard.
I hear you, but some people would think the same thing about you put something in your body or we're going to fire you. And I get you're kind of almost on the line.
Yeah, I'm like 52, 40, 48 on that, or 49, 51.
We've got more callers. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. Yeah, thank you for the call, Michael. If anybody else wants to join us, again, 202-521-1320. Let's go now to Brave, calling in from Atlanta, talking about the late Colin Powell. What's on your mind, Brave?
Hey, what's up, guys? I couldn't help but kind of laugh a little bit about there being a difference between being charged a fine personally of $5,000 if you're not vaccinated, but then versus being fired from your means of supporting your family and life.
You don't think there's a difference between those things?
I think they're both very ridiculous. I think they're both very.
Well, look, I think it's ridiculous for people to not get vaccinated. I also think it's ridiculous for people to walk in places without wearing a mask. Not caring about infecting other people who are there and around them. So, I guess all of us have our feelings about what's ridiculous. Fair enough?
No, I'm saying I respect that. I'm just saying that on his face, I don't see a difference between the two. But I called about Colin Powell, though. I can't help but say. Because I think that, rather, if I had to choose between the two, like say, in a Squid Games kind of way, I had to choose between the two, I would rather take the $5,000 fine. Because I could stay working or whatever. You go get a loan or something. I don't know.
You just pay that fine off theoretically, and then they stay on.
$5,000 hurts.
That's a lot of money. It depends on where you're working exactly.
Yeah, most people don't have $500 in the bank, and then try to pay a $5,000 fine. That is brutal.
I'm just not in touch enough. Where did Squid Game have to do with this, Brave? You said Squid Game.
I was just being silly, bro.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
It was like just if this was a Squid Game contest.
I thought you were talking about it in relation to Colin Powell, and we segued back into this anyway. Anyway, Brave.
No, I was just saying if I had to choose, gun to my head. But no, the Colin Powell thing is pretty hard. But Colin Powell, like I said, he was a pretty controversial figure as it applies to the whole weapons of mass destruction. Mm-hmm. I had a lot of respect for Colin Powell, even though I obviously didn't agree with the weapons of mass destruction little lie that they pulled on us. But he was a pretty good. He was highly respected, especially among service members. And one of the most respectable things about him is that when they were trying to push him to run for president, and he came out and said, "I would not put my family through that." I mean, basically admitting that he knows that they would drag his family through the rakes, right, through the mud to find some kind of dirt on him because of how that game is played. I thought that was pretty cool. To you guys' point earlier about people coming out and using his death as an example of why the vaccination doesn't work, I don't think that is. I would agree that I don't think it's fair to use that as an example of why the vaccinations don't work. But the terrain is such that where depending on which side you are for, those sides are harping on whatever options they have to attack the other side, no matter how lowly.
These are the times we live in, Brave. But still, I'm not gonna, I'm gonna hold my nose regardless.
Yeah, I don't think it's cool. I don't think it's cool. I mean, I don't know. I don't think it's cool. I think I don't even see why we have to have a this or that. Like I just before this time frame that we are in now, I just can't remember a time where when it comes to your medical choices, no matter what the situation is, where you have to be on this side or you have to be on that side.
Yeah.
I don't get that. I don't get it at all. And I'll leave it there. But I think it does. I think all this just furthers the divide and makes it worse. And I feel like going to Teresa's call earlier, well, no, actually not going to Teresa's call, because that was a whole other conversation. I just think that this is all being done purposefully.
I'll put it this way. I think the difference is if it was something that was specific and individual, like, it had no impact on anybody else. A person just stands there, that person gets some kind of illness or everything else, and that person just, goes. They're not lepers, no capacity to infect anybody else. If there wasn't 720,000 people that are basically dead within the course of a year and a half, then I don't think anybody would care. I mean, you may have people who are mock saying, dude, why are you doing X or Y? But the moment where it becomes the individual choice is not an individual choice because there's all sorts of downstream consequences, whether that's full hospitals, full ICUs, whether that's a lack of supplies for like monoclonal, whatever, because people don't necessarily want to get vaccinated.
Monoclonal antibodies.
Thank you. Shane always remembers the names of those things. It's no longer an individual choice. Yes, on some level it's individual, but that individual choice has larger consequences for society and for the other people who are around, those people who are making those individual choices. If it wasn't for that, I don't think you would have the issue. You disagree. Which part of that do you disagree with?
Let me be clear, because there's a large part of what you said that is valid. I just disagree at any point we're talking about a medical choice is no longer an individual choice. That's just I can't agree with that. Most doctors wouldn't agree with that, right? I would have to say that, and this kind of goes back to the whole thing of using Colin Powell's death for or against the vaccine. What we tend to see is that, again, if it works for a certain argument, then we'll dig down into the individual numbers and circumstances. But if it works for the argument in the other direction, then we'll just give the whole number, like just say 700,000 people. I'm not. Please don't take it. I'm not trying to hit you for it. I'm saying because this is what we the country that we use. When you say 700,000 people have died from COVID, right? When we know that there's information that numbers have been skewed, numbers have been falsely reported, that people have died with COVID but died from something else. Like much to your point about Colin Powell and what caused his death, even though he died with COVID. So those numbers become different. Now, I'm not making this an argument to challenge the numbers, although it does challenge the numbers. What I am saying is that the powers that be are using all of these large, broad stroke mechanisms, right, to hamper down on individuals in our society, again, on all of us, and say that you have to take a drug that is still in trial phases, and you are the trial, and or you lose your means to provide for your family, which is going to destroy the economy, one, and two, also, if you have adverse effects to it, we're not going to report on it, or we're going to push down those reports, and you can't sue the company, you can't sue the pharmaceutical company. You see what I'm saying? So if they say, okay, you have to take this drug, but it's guaranteed to work, one, two, as much as possible, right? And then two, if something happens to you and you are injured or it doesn't perform the way it should perform, your family then has the right to seek to be made whole by that company, then that's a little more fair. But when you say take this crap, and if you die, tough.
I agree with that personally.
I mean, Brave, if you were in the hospital and a doctor was working on you and he makes a mistake, you can't necessarily sue the doctor if the doctor necessarily wasn't doing anything, let's say, outrageous or unfair or, going beyond his medical issues.
But this is it's a couple other levels of screwed up added on because you have to work with that doctor. You have to work with that doctor, even though you don't necessarily trust them. And if they screw up, you have no recourse.
Well, I'm saying you don't necessarily trust the doctor before the distrust is after they screw up, not before they screw up. But it's this kind of thing that's in the medical thing that basically you can't sue that guy if that guy basically followed the kind of medical thing, even if there was somewhat of a mistake in the process. I'm not saying I like it. I'm just saying that is part and parcel to kind of the way this stuff works. Also, the issue of it being crap. I mean, at the point where you have like a 30-time difference between the people who are vaccinated versus the people who are unvaccinated in terms of death, crap doesn't necessarily apply. Even this notion of there are negative consequences. Well, the negative consequences were talked about. I mean, Europe, in some cases, disallowed certain versions of the vaccine in favor of others because they disagreed or they were concerned about some of the medical issues associated with it. So I feel you, though. I feel you.
One thing that we got back on the COVID stuff, and we got other callers, Brave, so I'm going to move on. But I agree with you about the whole being divided against each other irrationally in this era that we're in, and how weird it is how divided we are against each other. That stuff has gotten more intense. And I feel like just doing a reality check occasionally, we are in that weird environment right now. We're super against the people that we're super against, and that's not normal. That's not, that happens throughout history. I'm not saying it's completely new, but we hadn't been in that phase before this one for a long time. Last I can recall. Let's go now to Karen calling in from Maryland. Thank you again, Brave. Karen, you're talking about the U.S. Congress. What's on your mind?
Okay, well, I will keep this short and sweet. I don't think I have a lot of time, but I just want to know if you all are aware of this and you can provide me with a name, NAME. There was a member of Congress that was recently, within the last month, quoted as saying that our debt is limitless, or our debt can be limitless, or our debt can be unlimited, or whatever it is he said about the national debt. And it was just kind of like he had the attitude that Congress could create money, or it didn't make any difference how much debt the country got into.
The name is Rand Paul. The name NAME is Rand Paul. That sounds just like Rand Paul. I'm being ironic or something like that. I'm being sarcastic.
Yeah, Rand Paul certainly doesn't.
It's literally the furthest from Rand Paul, but go for it, Karen.
I mean, Dick Cheney has said it. Deficits don't matter, that famous comment. And even if you're talking to Alan Greenspan, when they were trying to interrogate him, Greenspan made the point about basically, he says, look, we create dollars. I mean, we're the reserve currency. But anytime you want a dollar, you basically have to come to the U.S. government to get it. But Karen, please continue.
No, that was my question. If you all knew the origin of the comment, because I'm trying to track that down.
I do not know the origin of that comment. I do not know the name, the NAME of that person either. Don't know who that is. But Karen, thank you for the call. I don't even know if we have enough time for this. We got 20 seconds. Let's try it anyway. Michael from Silver Spring, you got 15 seconds. What's on your mind, man?
All right, when we call people global elite and the government, we're really referring to the people that control the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve. It's not some obscure person. It's the Federal Reserve running the world. The people that print and create the money.
I don't know about that.
Thank you.
Well, Michael, thank you for the call. I don't know about that, though. There might have been a time where I might have agreed with you more, but the Federal Reserve is just one currency, printing just one currency. Granted, the reserve currency, but it seems like there are people who don't particularly have wouldn't necessarily need to be attached to the dollar because they have enough power to take whatever money they have, whatever assets they have in dollars, and turn them into other kinds of assets too. In other words, I don't know, the Federal Reserve is a big concentration of power, but I wouldn't say that it's at the top of the stack anywhere. I don't even know if there is a top of the stack, though. I think that's part of what's broken down here, is that there isn't a single elite. There are a bunch of groups of elites in the highest levels competing with each other. But hey, we've got to close this show out. We'll be back tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Eastern, folks. Thank you for listening to this edition of Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. See you again tomorrow at 7. See you on the other side.